They said the car was dead. 7 specialists. 3 of the most prestigious luxury automotive shops in the state. Every single one of them walked in, looked it over, and walked back out. 6 months minimum. That was the most optimistic estimate anyone offered, and even that came with no guarantees. But then one man, no fancy degree, no cutting-edge equipment, no team behind him, just a beat-up garage on the edge of a small city and 2 hands that had never stopped working, finished it in less than a day. This is the story of Lucas Bennett, single father, small-town mechanic, and the man who just did what every expert said was impossible. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told that you weren't enough, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The alarm went off at 5:14 in the morning, same as it always did. Lucas Bennett didn't slam the snooze button like most people. He didn't groan into his pillow or lie there bargaining with himself for 5 more minutes. He just opened his eyes, stared at the water stain on the ceiling above his bed, the one shaped vaguely like the state of Florida that he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. And he sat up. That was it. No dramatic awakening, no motivational music playing in his head, just a man getting out of bed because the day wasn't going to wait for him. And he'd learned a long time ago that the world had absolutely no interest in waiting for anybody. He was 32 years old, and most mornings he felt older. His bedroom was small, a queen mattress pushed against the wall, a dresser with the second drawer that never closed all the way, and a single window that faced east and let in the kind of early morning light that was more gray than gold. On the nightstand sat a photograph in a simple wooden frame, a woman with dark hair and a smile that had a little mischief in it, the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd just missed the punchline of a joke she'd told herself. Lucas didn't look at the photograph every morning. Some mornings he did. Some mornings he couldn't. This morning, he looked. Another one, he said quietly, to no one. He got up, pulled on a pair of work jeans that were stiff with old grease no amount of washing had ever fully removed, and padded down the hallway in his socks toward the kitchen. The house was a rental. 3 bedrooms, which sounded generous until you actually walked through it, and realized 2 of those bedrooms were barely large enough to turn around in. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac on the eastern edge of Delford, a city that was too big to call a town and too small to call anything impressive. The kind of place people were from rather than the kind of place people moved to on purpose. Lucas had grown up 20 minutes south of here, in an even smaller town that had since lost its grocery store and its only diner and was now mostly just a zip code. He'd ended up in Delford because of Claire, because Claire had a sister here, and when she got sick, being close to family had mattered more than anything else. After Claire died, moving didn't make sense anymore. Ava's school was here. Her friends were here. The life they'd built, small and imperfect as it was here. So Lucas stayed. And he kept getting up at 5:14 every morning because that's what staying required. He made coffee in a machine that was held together partly by function and partly by stubbornness. A plastic tab on the left side had broken off 8 months ago, and now the whole thing had to be propped slightly to the right against the backsplash, or the carafe would leak. He'd been meaning to buy a new one. He was always meaning to do something. While the coffee brewed, he made Ava's lunch. 2 slices of bread, turkey and cheddar, mustard on one side only because she was inexplicably opposed to mustard touching both sides of the bread simultaneously, a rule she'd established at age 7 and never backed down from. An apple, a small bag of pretzels. A note, because he always wrote her a note, had done it since she started 2nd grade, even when some mornings the note was nothing more than, "Have a good one, bug." Love, Dad. He folded the note, tucked it under the sandwich bag, and zipped the lunchbox closed. The coffee finished. He poured a mug and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the driveway where his truck, a 2009 F150 with a cracked right taillight and 214,000 miles on it, sat under the pale early sky. He drank his coffee and thought about money. He did this most mornings. Not obsessively, not in a panic, more like a man checking weather conditions before deciding how to dress. Rent was due in 11 days. The water heater had been making a sound it wasn't supposed to make since March. Ava needed new cleats for soccer. She'd mentioned it twice and then stopped mentioning it, which was somehow worse than if she'd kept asking. His shop, Bennett Auto Repair, a name that had always sounded slightly more official than the reality deserved, had brought in decent work the past 2 weeks, but decent wasn't the same as comfortable. And comfortable wasn't something Lucas had experienced in a while. He finished the coffee, rinsed the mug, put it on the drying rack. He went and knocked gently on Ava's door. "Tw. Hey, Bug, 20 minutes. A muffled sound from inside that was technically a response. "That means get up," he clarified. "I'm up," said a voice that was clearly horizontal. "Ava?" A pause, then the distinct sound of blankets being thrown off with great theatrical resentment. "Fine." Lucas smiled to himself. The private kind. The kind he didn't let her see because she was 11, and at 11, your parents smiling at your grumpiness felt like a personal insult. He went back to the kitchen, poured a second coffee into a travel mug, and started getting his own gear together. Work boots. His jacket. Canvas, olive green, with a tear along the left pocket seam that he'd sewn up himself with thread that was close to but not exactly the right color. His keys. The travel mug. By the time Ava appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair still chaotic, wearing her soccer hoodie over her pajama pants, Lucas had already pulled the bread back out to make her toast because she always wanted toast and somehow always forgot to ask for it until it was nearly too late. "You made toast," she said, surprised in spite of herself. "I always make toast." She dropped into a chair at the kitchen table, pulled her knees up to her chest, and accepted the plate he slid in front of her with the particular graciousness of someone who was not yet fully conscious. "We have a science thing due Friday," she said, staring at her toast. "What kind of science thing?" "Like a project. About ecosystems." "Have you started it?" She picked up the toast and took a bite rather than answering immediately. "Ava, I've been thinking about it. Thinking isn't starting. Thinking is the foundation of starting," she said, which was either very logical or completely ridiculous and somehow managed to be both. She looked up at him with her mother's eyes, deep brown, sharp, and carrying that same trace of amusement that made it hard for him to stay firm when he needed to be. "I'll work on it tonight, I promise." He studied her for a moment. "Okay, tonight." "Tonight," she confirmed. They ate in the comfortable near silence of two people who knew each other well enough that silence didn't need filling. Outside, the sky had lightened from gray to a pale washed-out blue. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something. The refrigerator hummed. Lucas watched his daughter eat her toast and thought, not for the first time, that she was the most important thing he'd ever done, and the thing he understood the least, both simultaneously, every single day. Talked. He dropped her at school at 7:40. She jumped out of the truck with her backpack half-zipped and her ponytail already coming loose, jogged up the walkway without looking back, and disappeared through the double doors with the effortless confidence of someone for whom belonging had never been a question. Lucas watched until the doors closed behind her. Then he pulled out of the drop-off lane, merged onto Route 9, and drove the 11 minutes to the shop. Bennett Auto Repair occupied a converted two-bay garage on the service road behind an aging strip mall, sandwiched between a Vietnamese sandwich shop that opened at 11 and a storage facility that seemed to have no business hours whatsoever. The sign above the garage door was a painted plywood board that Lucas had made himself 8 years ago when he opened the place. It was weathered now, the letters slightly faded, and he was aware that it did not convey the image of a premium automotive establishment. He was also aware that he couldn't afford a new sign right now, so the weathered one would have to keep doing the job. He unlocked the side door, flipped on the fluorescents. 3 of the 8 buzzed and flickered before stabilizing. One simply refused and stood for a moment in the familiar smell of the place. Oil, metal, rubber, the faint chemical ghost of solvent. It was a smell most people would find unpleasant. To Lucas, it was something close to the smell of home. He had 2 employees, sort of. Marcus Webb was 26, had been with Lucas for 4 years, and was a genuinely skilled mechanic who unfortunately approached every morning like it was a personal attack on his constitutional right to sleep in. He arrived at 8:03. Not the first time he'd been late, not the last. Wearing a hoodie with the drawstrings missing and carrying a gas station breakfast sandwich that smelled aggressively of egg. "Morning," Lucas said, already under the hood of a Chevy Traverse that had come in the day before with a cooling system issue. "Barely," Marcus replied, taking a large bite of his sandwich while simultaneously trying to locate his work gloves. The second employee was Patty Okafor, 41, no nonsense, the only person in the shop who organized the supply shelves according to a system that made sense to her and no one else, and who could diagnose an exhaust problem by sound alone with an accuracy that genuinely impressed Lucas. She arrived at 7:58, already wearing her coveralls, and immediately started on the brake job they hadn't finished the afternoon before. For about 45 minutes, the morning proceeded normally. Then, Derek Fuentes called. Derek owned the only McLaren dealership within 200 miles, a glass and steel showroom on the north side of Delford that catered to a clientele for whom the phrase price point was more philosophical than practical. Lucas had done a couple of small jobs for Derek over the years, documentation work mostly, the kind of thing that required a licensed shop but not necessarily a luxury facility. They weren't friends exactly, but they had a functional professional respect for each other. Bennett, Derek's voice on the phone was doing something unusual. It was doing something that sounded like discomfort. Derek Fuentes was not a man who typically experienced discomfort. "I've got a situation, and before you say anything, I need you to hear me out." Lucas set down the wrench he was holding. "I'm listening." "You know Victoria Hayes?" Lucas thought. The name was familiar in the way that certain names in a city became familiar. You heard them without ever having a direct encounter. Victoria Hayes, tech CEO, had started some kind of software company that had apparently grown faster than anyone expected. Her name appeared in the local business section occasionally. He'd seen her photograph once, maybe twice. "I know who she is," Lucas said. "She's a client. Good client. She owns a 720S, orange flare exterior, black interior, the full sport pack. It was being transported back from a specialist facility 3 states over, and something went wrong with the transport rig. Bad. The car sustained significant damage." Derek paused. "I mean significant, Lucas. This isn't a dented bumper situation. What kind of damage are we talking?" Derek made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a groan, but existed somewhere in between. "Full front impact. Suspension damage, both sides. The electronics went haywire on impact. We think from the harness getting disrupted. The ECU is throwing codes that don't even have registered definitions yet. The body damage is one thing that we can handle. But the systems, nobody can figure out what's actually wrong versus what the systems think is wrong. 3 of my guys spent 2 days on it. I called Carrera Precision over in Westbrook. They had it for 4 days. Southwest Motorsport looked at it." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "What did Southwest say?" 6 months, minimum, possibly longer depending on parts sourcing for the electronics." Another pause. "Victoria is," Derek chose his word carefully. "She's not happy. She's been incredibly patient, actually, more than I expected, but she's running out of runway. She needs that car, Lucas. It's complicated. I don't fully understand all of it, but she needs it." "Derek." Lucas leaned against the wall of the garage. "Why are you calling me?" There was a brief silence on the other end. "Because," Derek said with the tone of a man admitting something against his better judgment, "you fixed the Series 3 situation 2 years ago. The one with the phantom electrical fault that BMW's own diagnostic system couldn't locate. You found it in 6 hours. Lucas remembered that job. A 3 Series with an electrical gremlin that had defeated 2 shops and 1 factory technician. He'd found it by essentially disregarding the diagnostic readout and tracing the circuit by hand. Old-fashioned, time-consuming, and ultimately successful. A 720S is not a 3 Series, Lucas said. No, it's considerably more complicated. I don't have the proprietary diagnostic software for McLaren systems. I know. Or the specialized tooling. I know that too. Derek, I'm not asking you to guarantee anything, Derek said, and his voice had dropped some of its professional composure. He sounded suddenly like someone who had run out of options and was making a call he wasn't sure about. I'm asking you to look at it. That's all. Just look at it. If you look at it and tell me it's beyond what you can do, I'll believe you and we'll figure out another path. But I need someone who actually thinks about cars instead of just running protocol on them. And right now that person is you. Lucas stared at the oil-stained concrete floor of his garage. He thought about the Traverse with the cooling system issue. He thought about the brake job Patty was working on. He thought about the water heater making sounds it shouldn't make, and Ava's cleats, and rent in 11 days. He thought about what Derek had just described, the kind of job that had defeated multiple specialists and was currently sitting somewhere waiting for someone to solve it. He thought about the photograph on his nightstand. "Have it brought over," he said. The McLaren arrived at 11:20 on a flatbed. Lucas had seen damaged luxury cars before. He'd seen accident damage that made him wince. But when the truck pulled into the service road and the car came off the ramp, even Marcus, who treated most things with studied indifference, stopped what he was doing and stared. The orange flare paint was a color that probably had a beautiful name in the McLaren catalog, something like Papaya Spark or Solar Velocity. And in its undamaged state, Lucas imagined it had been genuinely stunning, the kind of color that didn't ask for your attention so much as it simply took it. Now, the front end had been folded and reconstructed by impact in a way that looked almost architectural in its devastation. The hood was buckled. The front splitter, a carbon fiber component that cost more than Lucas's truck, was shattered in 3 distinct pieces that had been gathered and placed inside the cabin like a memorial. The left front wheel sat at an angle that no wheel was supposed to sit at. The right front suspension had partially collapsed, and that was just what he could see from the outside. The flatbed driver handed him the clipboard for signature. "Bunch of guys already looked at this thing," the driver offered, with the cheerful helpfulness of someone who wasn't responsible for fixing it. "Heard it's basically totaled." "Thanks," Lucas said, and signed. He walked a slow circle around the car. Patty appeared beside him. She looked at it for a long moment. "That's not great," she said. "No." "The suspension on the left. I see it. And whatever happened to the electrical, the way Derek described it? I heard." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You sure about this?" Lucas crouched down beside the left front wheel well and looked at the suspension geometry, or what remained of it. He tilted his head slightly, the way he always did when he was reading a mechanical situation rather than just looking at it. His eyes moved slowly, tracking, measuring distances and angles in a way that had no formal training behind it, just years of looking at things until looking became understanding. "Not even a little," he said honestly. Patty nodded as if that was actually a reasonable answer. "Okay, what do you need?" "Diagnostic interface, my laptop, and the McLaren technical schematics. See if Derek can email the service documentation package." "Already texted him?" she said, pulling out her phone. "Of course you did," Lucas said, and almost smiled. Marcus helped him push the car into the main bay. It couldn't be driven, obviously, but the steering was just functional enough and the wheels just cooperative enough that with effort, they got it positioned under the lights. For the first 10 minutes, Lucas simply looked. He didn't connect anything, didn't run diagnostics, didn't touch a single component. He walked around the car slowly, methodically, crouching here and standing on a step stool there, getting angles and perspectives. He looked at the structural damage, the body damage, the visible component damage. He looked at where things had bent, where they'd broken clean, and where the damage pattern didn't quite make sense given the reported direction of impact. He was doing what he always did at the start of a complicated job, building a picture. Not of what was wrong, that came later, but of what the car was, how it was put together, what connected to what, where the load paths ran. It was the same principle as reading a book before you tried to edit it. Marcus watched him from across the garage, leaning against the Traverse he'd abandoned. "It's that bad?" "I don't know yet." "Those other shops?" "Couldn't figure it out, yeah." "And you think you can?" Lucas looked at him. "I think I can look at it in a way they didn't. Whether that gets us anywhere, I don't know." Marcus chewed on this. "Derek said Southwest wanted 6 months. Derek mentioned that. 6 months is a long time to be wrong. So is one afternoon," Lucas said. "Hand me the interface cable." Prompt. The initial diagnostic run took 40 minutes and confirmed 2 things simultaneously. The problem was complicated, and the problem was also possibly not as complicated as it looked. This was a distinction that most of the previous shops had apparently not made. The McLaren's integrated systems, the hydraulic suspension, the active chassis management, the engine management unit, the stability control, the power delivery network, were all throwing errors. The diagnostic output, when Lucas first pulled it up on his laptop screen, looked less like a repair checklist and more like someone had scattered error codes across the page like confetti. 47 distinct fault flags. 8 systems in various states of reported failure. Warning indicators that reference subsystems he'd never personally worked with. Marcus looked at the screen over his shoulder and made a low sound. Man. Yeah. That's a lot. It looks like a lot, Lucas agreed. He was scrolling through the codes carefully, not in a hurry, reading each one the way you'd read a dense paragraph. Not just for the individual words, but for what they added up to. Something was bothering him. He scrolled back up to the top, scrolled down again, slower this time. What? Patty asked, noticing his expression. These codes, he said. Look at the timestamps on them. She leaned in, looked, then looked again. They're all generated within a 2-second window, Lucas said. Every single one. 47 different system failures, all reported simultaneously. Patty straightened. She understood immediately where he was going. That's not how 47 systems fail. No, Lucas said. It's not. If these were 47 independent failures, you'd see a cascade. Some happening before others, some triggering others. There'd be a sequence. He pointed at the screen. This has no sequence. Everything fails at the same exact moment. Marcus frowned. So what does that mean? It means, Lucas said slowly, still staring at the screen, that most of these probably aren't real failures. They're reported failures. Something happened, something specific, and the system lost the ability to verify its own components correctly. So it did the safe thing and flagged everything as failed. Like a circuit breaker, Patty said. Like every circuit breaker in the house tripping at once because one wire shorted, Lucas said. The lights go out in every room, but the problem is just in one place. Marcus looked from Lucas to the screen to the car. So all those shops were trying to fix 47 things, when there's probably closer to 1, Lucas said. Maybe 2. He closed the diagnostic readout and reached for his work gloves. All right, he said. Let's find the wire. The next several hours were the kind of work that doesn't look impressive from the outside. No dramatic moments, no sudden revelations, just a man systematically working through a very complicated machine, section by section, following logic and evidence rather than assumption. Lucas started with the suspension, not because he thought it was the source of the electrical problem, but because the physical damage needed to be assessed independently of the systems issue, and because working with his hands on something concrete helped him think. He cataloged the suspension damage carefully, measuring and documenting. The left control arm was genuinely bent. That would need replacement. The left hub bearing was compromised. But the subframe itself, which he'd been prepared to find twisted, was actually intact. A careful examination of the mounting points confirmed that the frame hadn't flexed the way everyone had assumed, which meant the structural damage, while real, was more contained than reported. Patty confirmed it from the other side, crawling under the car with a flashlight and a measuring tape. Left side is bad but workable, she called out. Right side. The geometry is off, but the components look salvageable. Whoever wrote up the initial damage report didn't get under here properly. Southwest never got under it at all, Lucas said. They were too focused on the electrical. Their loss, Patty said, sliding back out. Marcus, to his credit, had stopped making skeptical comments and started actually working. He began stripping the damaged body panels, not because the panels were the priority, but because getting them out of the way would give Lucas access to the wiring harness sections he needed to reach. He worked steadily, if not always quietly. Can I ask you something? Marcus said somewhere around the second hour. You're going to either way, Lucas said. Fair. Marcus pulled a bolt that resisted him, then gave in. How do you know the problem isn't actually in the ECU? Like the computer itself got damaged? I don't know, Lucas said. But the ECU was in a protected cavity, and there's no physical damage to the unit itself. If the computer was damaged, you'd typically see different code patterns, corrupted data, looping errors. What we're seeing instead is clean error flags. The system is working. It just thinks everything connected to it has failed. So the system is healthy, but it can't see the car. That's one way to put it, Lucas said, which means the problem is in the conversation between the system and the car, not the system itself. Marcus considered this. So it's like a translation problem. Lucas stopped what he was doing for just a moment. He looked at Marcus. Yeah, he said. Actually, yeah. That's exactly what it is. Joyce said. Around 2 in the afternoon, Derek Fuentes showed up in person. He stood in the garage doorway in slacks and a collared shirt that had no business being anywhere near an auto shop. And he looked at the McLaren, partially disassembled now, panels removed, Lucas buried to the elbow in the driver's side wiring harness, with the expression of a man who had complicated feelings about complicated situations. How's it going? He asked, which was either a straightforward question or a loaded one. Going, Lucas said, without looking up. Derek walked closer. He looked at the suspension work Patty had done, the left control arm laid out on the workbench, a new one sourced and already on the way from a supplier 3 states over. He looked at the organized chaos of the disassembly. He looked at Lucas's laptop screen, which had the wiring schematic open and was covered in digital annotations. You've made progress, Derek said, sounding slightly surprised. Some, Lucas allowed. The bodywork, secondary issue. We'll get to it. Derek was quiet for a moment. Victoria's going to call me this afternoon. She calls every day at 4. I've been telling her we're working on it, but I'm going to need something more specific. Lucas finally looked up at him. His face had the focused, slightly remote expression it got when he was deep in a problem. Not unfriendly, but not fully present in the social sense either. Tell her we've identified that the electrical fault is likely a single communication failure rather than multiple independent failures, and that we're in the process of locating it. Derek processed this. Is that accurate? It's what I believe, yes. And if you're wrong? Lucas held Derek's gaze. Then I'm wrong, and I'll tell you that when I know it. But right now, it's what I believe. Derek nodded slowly. All right. He turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, Bennett, the fact that you're still in there after 5 hours, that means something. Everyone else was done in a day and a half. Lucas had already looked back down at the wiring harness. Thanks, Derek. He meant it, but he didn't have time to mean it properly. He had a problem to solve. At 3:30, Marcus had to leave for a prior commitment he'd mentioned that morning, something involving his sister's move that he'd apparently forgotten to remind Lucas about until now. Lucas told him to go. The work Marcus had done was solid. The disassembly was clean and organized. The documentation was thorough enough. After Marcus left, the garage got quieter. Patty stayed. She didn't say anything about staying. She just didn't leave. She moved to the workbench and began carefully inspecting the suspension components that had been removed, cleaning and measuring, documenting what could be reused versus what needed replacement. The quiet sound of her work, metal on metal, the scratch of her pen on the clipboard, filled the garage alongside the hum of the fluorescents. Lucas was now fully focused on the wiring harness. The McLaren's electrical architecture was dense, designed with redundancy and protection in mind, which was good engineering but made tracing a fault significantly harder. He was working through it methodically, testing continuity between connection points, checking resistance values, tracing signal pathways from the ECU's communication bus outward toward each major system. Most of what he found was fine. That was the tricky part. Most of the connections he tested came back within spec. The bus communication itself was healthy. The individual system modules were largely responding correctly when addressed directly. Whatever was wrong was subtle, but not a burned-out wire or a catastrophically failed component, but something smaller. A break in the chain that was just large enough to cause catastrophic confusion. He thought about the way the car's systems had all reported failure simultaneously. A communication failure. A translation problem, Marcus had called it. He kept working. At 5:45, with the afternoon light going gray outside the garage door and the Vietnamese sandwich shop next door starting to close up for the day, Patty set down her clipboard. You gonna pick up Ava? She asked. Lucas looked at his watch, looked at the car, looked back at his watch. She's at Maya's until 7, he said. Maya Chen was Ava's best friend, and Maya's mother, a kind, practical woman named Diane, had picked both girls up from school today. He'd texted Diane that morning when Derek had called, asking if Ava could stay a little late. Diane had responded, Of course. She's always welcome. How late? He'd written back, Hopefully not past 7. I'll keep you posted. He texted Diane now. Still working? Can she stay until 7:30? I'm so sorry. The response came back in under a minute. She's fine. Take your time. The girls are on their third snack. He exhaled slowly. I've got until 7:30, he told Patty. Patty nodded. I'll stay until 6. Then I have to get home. She paused. You want me to bring you something from the sandwich place before they close? He started to say no. He always started to say no. And then he realized he hadn't eaten since 7 a.m., and his hands had a faint unsteadiness that he recognized as low blood sugar. Yeah, he said. Whatever you're getting, thanks. She came back 12 minutes later with 2 banh mi and 2 waters and set them on the cleared section of workbench without comment. They ate mostly in silence, Lucas sitting on an overturned crate, still running scenarios in his head, still building and rebuilding the mental map of the car's electrical network. What's Ava doing this weekend? Patty asked. Soccer Saturday morning. Science project the rest of the time, apparently. He took a bite of the sandwich. She hasn't started it. Patty smiled. She'll be fine. That kid finishes everything. She finishes everything at the last possible minute while insisting she's not stressed about it. Sounds like someone else I know. Lucas looked at her. She looked back at him with the particular expression of someone who has made an accurate observation and is comfortable with the accuracy of it. He went back to eating his sandwich. I don't do things at the last minute. You called Derek back in 30 seconds and took on a job that 3 luxury shops gave up on. That's not the last minute. It's somebody's last minute, Patty said. Just not yours. At 6:02, she left. The garage was quiet then. Just Lucas, the car, the fluorescent lights, and the particular focused silence of a problem that hadn't been solved yet. He went back to work. He had moved from the main harness to the connector junctions, the places where separate harness sections met and communication between systems was most likely to degrade. There were dozens of these throughout the vehicle. He was working from the ECU outward, checking each junction systematically, not skipping any because of impatience and not rushing because of pride. At 6:44, his phone buzzed. He picked it up without looking away from the connector he was inspecting. Yeah, Dad? Ava's voice, a little cautious, reading the situation through the phone the way she always could. Diane says dinner is almost ready and I can stay if you need more time. You can stay, he said. I'm still working. Is it the car that came in today? Marcus texted me. She paused. He said it looked crazy. Marcus had texted his 11-year-old daughter about work. He'd have to address that at some point. Yeah, it's the car. Is it bad? It's complicated. Can you fix it? He was looking at a connector junction in the left section of the sub-harness, section L7, according to the schematic, a junction that connected the primary communication bus to the suspension control module on the left side. It was in a location that had been close to the impact zone, not directly impacted, but close enough that the force could have transmitted. He hadn't tested this one yet. He'd been working toward it systematically for the better part of the afternoon. He reached for his multimeter. I don't know yet, he told Ava honestly. I'll know more soon. Have dinner with the Chens. I'll pick you up at 7:30. Okay. A small pause. Dad? Yeah. Nothing is impossible once someone decides to start. Her voice was matter-of-fact, like she was simply stating a known truth. You said that. He remembered saying it. He'd said it to her about 2 months ago, when she'd been stuck on a math unit that had defeated her for a week, and she'd come to him frustrated and ready to give up. He'd said it without thinking about it too hard, not as a speech, just as the thing he believed and had always believed, which was that the starting was the hardest part, and everything after that was just the work. He hadn't expected her to keep it. I know I said that, he told her. Okay. See you at 7:30. She hung up. Lucas held the phone for a moment, looking at nothing. Then he put it down, picked up the multimeter, and tested the junction at section L7. The reading was wrong, not catastrophically wrong, not zero resistance or an open circuit, just wrong in the way that made him stop and look at it again. The resistance value was slightly elevated, just barely outside spec. In isolation, on a healthy car, it might not have meant anything. Connectors aged, contacts developed slight impedance, values drifted. Normal. But in a car where every system was reporting simultaneous failure and nobody could explain why, slightly outside spec was suddenly very interesting. He pulled the multimeter leads, reseated them, tested again. Same reading. He reached for his flashlight. The connector junction at L7 was mounted deep in the left side of the sub-harness, behind a bracket that required removing 2 bolts to access properly. He'd skipped the bolts on the initial look. He'd been doing visual checks at that point, not contact checks. He'd planned to come back to it. He came back to it now. He removed the bracket, got the flashlight in at the right angle. And there, on the male pin side of the junction connector, pin 7 of the 12-pin cluster, the one that carried the primary CAN bus signal from the central ECU to the suspension and chassis management systems, was a pin that looked, at first glance, like all the other pins. Except it wasn't. It took him another 2 minutes of careful examination to see it properly. The pin had not been sheared or obviously broken. It had been compressed, slightly deformed under the lateral load of the impact, pushed just far enough out of alignment that the connection it made with the female socket was marginal. Enough to sometimes carry the signal. Enough to pass a visual inspection. But under vibration, under load, under the conditions of an actual system operation, intermittent, unreliable. The signal dropping out at moments when the system expected it to be present. And when that signal dropped out, that primary CAN bus signal, the one that the ECU used to communicate with every suspension and chassis management system simultaneously, the ECU did the only safe thing it could do. It flagged every connected system as failed. 47 error codes, generated in a 2-second window, from a single pin pushed 1 millimeter out of true. Lucas sat back on his heels. He was aware that his back ached and his knees hurt from the crate he'd been crouched on. He was aware that it was now 7:08 p.m. and he needed to leave in 20 minutes to get Ava. He was also aware that he was looking at the entire problem, not 47 problems. 1. He reached for his pin repair tool. The repair itself, the actual physical correction of the fault, took 11 minutes. Using a pin extraction tool and a set of precision forming pliers he'd had for years, Lucas carefully extracted the deformed pin from its housing, reformed it to the correct profile using the smallest of movements, the kind of work that required the fingers to be steadier than felt reasonable after a 10-hour day, and reseated it in the connector junction. He tested the contact geometry before reinserting the housing. He tested continuity after. He checked the resistance value. Within spec, he reinstalled the connector housing, reinstalled the bracket, reconnected the junction to the harness. Then he sat back and looked at the car. The clock on his phone said 7:19. He connected his laptop, cleared the fault codes, and ran a live data stream from the ECU. Systems came online one by one. Suspension, chassis management, stability control, power delivery, active exhaust. The dashboard warning lights, which he could see through the windshield even though the car wasn't running, began disappearing from the cluster. 1, 3, 7, 14. In 40 seconds, 42 of the 47 error codes had cleared. The remaining 5 were real faults, related to the physical damage. The bent control arm, the compromised bearing. Things that had been broken by the impact and would need physical repair. Legitimate, traceable, fixable. Not 47 problems. 5. And one of them was already halfway solved. Lucas sat in the quiet of the garage, hands on his knees, looking at the laptop screen. He thought about what Ava had said on the phone. Nothing is impossible once someone decides to start. He'd said it to her, and she'd given it back to him. He picked up his phone and called Derek. Derek answered on the second ring. "Bennett, it's late. Tell me something." "Found it," Lucas said. A pause. A long one. "Found it? The whole thing?" "The source of the electrical failures. Connector pin in the primary CAN bus junction, left side sub-harness, section L7. It was deformed in the impact, looked fine visually, but it was intermittently breaking the bus signal. The ECU was reading every connected system as offline every time the signal dropped." Silence on the other end. "I've corrected the pin," Lucas continued. "Cleared the codes. We're down to 5 active faults, all of them physical damage items from the impact. Real problems, not phantom ones. The control arm, the bearing, couple of secondary items. Things we can address. You're serious, Derek said. Not a question. More like a man recalibrating his understanding of something. Yeah. And the car isn't running yet. I still need to do the structural repairs, finish the harness inspection, address the remaining fault items. That's more work. Lucas looked at the clock. But the thing that defeated everyone else, the thing that was making it look impossible, that's done. Another silence. Lucas? Derek's voice was different now, quieter. I told Victoria this afternoon it might be a week. I told her we were optimistic but realistic. You can call her back, Lucas said. I'll call her right now, Derek said. Then before he hung up, Bennett, I owe you. You owe me a fair invoice, Lucas said. That's all. He hung up, grabbed his jacket, turned off the lights in the main bay, leaving on the small corner light he always left on, locked the side door, got in his truck, drove to pick up his daughter, Ate. Ava was waiting on the front steps of the Chen house when he pulled up, backpack on her lap, Diane standing in the doorway behind her with the kind of warm, understanding expression that Lucas was always slightly embarrassed to be on the receiving end of. Ava jumped up when she saw the truck, said something to Diane, probably a thank you, she was good about that, and came down the walkway. She climbed in, looked at him, looked at his hands on the steering wheel, still carrying the ghost of grease despite how thoroughly he'd scrubbed them at the shop sink. You fixed it, she said. He pulled away from the curb. We'll see. You fixed it, she repeated with the certainty of someone who has made up their mind. He glanced at her sideways. The big part. Still more work to do. But the impossible part. He thought about the pin. 1 millimeter out of alignment, half a day of work. The moment the warning lights began disappearing from the cluster. Yeah, he said. The impossible part. Ava nodded once, satisfied, and looked out the passenger window at the passing streets. The city at night, the gas stations and apartment complexes and lit windows of houses where people were finishing their dinners and watching TV and putting their kids to bed. Good, she said simply. They drove home. The house was quiet when they got home. That particular kind of quiet that settles into a place after 9 o'clock. Not empty, but still. The refrigerator hum. The soft tick of the baseboard heater. The sound of Ava's sneakers on the kitchen floor as she dropped her backpack on the chair she always dropped it on, which was not the chair Lucas had designated for backpacks, a distinction she had decided somewhere around age 9 was not worth observing. Science project, he said, not looking up from where he was pulling off his boots. Tomorrow? She said. Tonight. A pause, the sound of the refrigerator opening. It's 9 o'clock, Dad. You've got until 10. Another pause, longer this time. Then, fine, but I need the good scissors. Junk drawer, he said, where they always are. She disappeared into the kitchen. He heard the junk drawer open. It stuck, required a specific lifting and pulling motion that both of them knew instinctively. And then the sound of shuffling while she located the scissors among the batteries and twist ties and expired coupons and small mysteries that accumulated in junk drawers everywhere. Lucas sat on the bench by the door and looked at his hands. The repair shop smell clung to him even after scrubbing. It wasn't something that fully washed off in a single session. His knuckles were dry, a little cracked at the joints from the constant washing and the work gloves and the general wear of the job. His right thumb had a small cut along the side that he didn't remember getting. He was tired, the specific kind of tired that settled into the muscles rather than just the mind, the kind you earned, but underneath it something else, something quieter and harder to name. Not satisfaction exactly. More like the feeling after you've been holding your breath for a long time and finally remembered to let it out. He thought about the pin. Section L7, 1 millimeter. He thought about what Derek had said. I told Victoria it might be a week, and what he'd said back. You can call her back. He hadn't really processed what he'd found until he was driving to get Ava. Sitting in the truck at a red light on Meridian, the city ordinary and indifferent around him, and the weight of it had come in sideways. 7 specialists, 3 shops, 6 months minimum, and a pin that had been sitting there the whole time, waiting for someone to look at it the right way. It wasn't pride he felt. Pride was too clean, too uncomplicated. It was more like something stubborn in him had simply refused to be wrong. He got up, went to the kitchen, and started making himself a cup of instant coffee because the good machine took too long and he didn't have the patience for it tonight. Ava had spread her science project materials across the kitchen table. Poster board, markers, printed pages she'd apparently pulled from somewhere, the good scissors in her hand. She was looking at it all with the expression of someone surveying a battlefield and mentally calculating the odds. "What's the ecosystem?" Lucas asked, leaning against the counter while the water heated. "Coral reef." She uncapped a marker. "I have to show the food chain and how pollution affects it." "You know about coral reefs?" "I know things," she said, which was technically true and not quite an answer. "You should start with the structure," Lucas said. "What lives there? What depends on what? Build the picture before you add the problem." She looked up at him. "That's actually good advice." "I give good advice." "Sometimes," she said, and started drawing. He made his coffee, stood there for a few minutes watching her work. She drew with focused energy, the same way she played soccer, not gracefully, but with total commitment. Her handwriting was big and slightly uneven, and she'd already spelled something wrong on the poster board in permanent marker. And rather than acknowledge this, she'd incorporated it into the design in a way that was almost convincing. She was so much her mother sometimes that it was like being gently punched in the chest. He took his coffee to the living room and sat down on the couch, with the intention of reviewing the invoice notes he needed to write up. He fell asleep 11 minutes later with his phone in his hand and the Notes app open to a blank page. Ava found him there at 10:30, turned off the light he'd left on, and went to bed without waking him. She'd learned in the years since her mother died to read when he needed the rest more than the reminder. He woke at 2 a.m. with a stiff neck and the cold specific to couches in late spring when the heat goes off at midnight, and lay there in the dark for a few minutes with the familiar middle-of-the-night mind, the one that didn't have the daytime's distractions to keep certain thoughts at bay. He thought about Claire, not the end of it. He tried not to think about the end of it at this hour because at 2 a.m. there was no good place for those thoughts to go. He thought about the earlier parts, the way she used to stay up until midnight working on things that interested her, articles and books, and half-finished paintings on a canvas that was still in the closet of the spare bedroom because he hadn't figured out what to do with it yet. The way she'd made coffee by feel in the dark so she didn't wake him. The argument they'd had once, only once, but it had been a real one, about money, about the shop, about whether staying in Delford was a plan or just an avoidance of having a plan. She'd been right in the argument. She'd been more right than he'd been willing to say at the time. He thought about that sometimes. Not with guilt, exactly. More with the wish that he'd said it while she could still hear it. He got up, covered his neck with a hand and rotated it until something cracked, went and drank a glass of water at the kitchen sink, and looked at Ava's poster board on the table. She'd finished it. The coral reef ecosystem was spread across the blue-painted surface in marker and colored pencil, the food chain arrows pointing in all directions, the pollution effects section in the bottom right corner done in deliberately darker colors. The misspelled word had been transformed into a label for a different component entirely, and it mostly worked. He stood there a minute, just looking at it. Something about it, the quiet evidence of her sitting here working while he slept, made his throat do something he didn't have time for at 2 a.m. He went back to the couch, pulled the throw blanket over himself, and made himself sleep. In the morning, Derek called at 7:15. Lucas had already dropped Ava at school. She'd gone with the poster board tucked under her arm, like a shield, told him twice it was fine when he asked about it, and jumped out of the truck in the same half-zippered, ponytail-slipping way she always did. He was on his way to the shop when Derek's name appeared on the truck's Bluetooth display. "Morning," Lucas said. "Victoria wants to come see it." Derek's voice was doing the unusual thing again. The discomfort thing, but a different variety of it now. Less desperate, more careful. "Today, if possible." Lucas considered. The car wasn't running yet. The physical repairs, the control arm replacement, the bearing, the remaining harness sections, the body panel work, were still ahead of him. A car in the middle of repair didn't look impressive. It looked like a car in the middle of repair. "She can come," he said. "But she should know it's not finished." "She knows. She just wants to—" Derek paused. "I think she needs to see progress. She's been dealing with a lot of people who told her a lot of things, and none of them delivered. She needs to see that something is actually happening. Lucas understood that. He'd been that person on the other side of it, the person waiting for someone to deliver something, enough times to know what that particular waiting felt like. "Tell her after noon," he said. "We'll have more done by then." Marcus arrived at the shop at 8:09, an improvement of 6 minutes over yesterday, and appeared slightly surprised to find Lucas already under the McLaren, having resumed work on the left suspension at some point before 8. "You sleep here?" Marcus asked. "Home," Lucas said. "Now hand me the torque wrench." Marcus handed him the torque wrench. He looked at the car. The new control arm that had arrived overnight from the supplier, already partially installed, the methodical progress visible even to someone who hadn't been here to watch it happen. "You find the electrical thing?" Marcus asked. "Found it last night." "And?" "One pin. Primary CAN bus connector." Marcus stared at him, then at the car, then back at him. One pin made all of that happen. "One pin in the right place can make anything happen," Lucas said. "Torque this down, please. 72 foot-pounds." Marcus took the wrench, positioned himself, and did it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The other shops, they were chasing 47 faults? They were chasing the symptoms instead of the cause. Because the cause didn't look like a cause." "It never does," Lucas said, and moved to the next component. They worked in the focused rhythm that good collaborative work found eventually. Not synchronized exactly, but aware of each other, passing tools without being asked, reading the job's flow. Patty arrived at her usual time, took in the progress, asked 3 specific questions about the harness inspection status, and went to work on the body panel restoration without being told what to do. Lucas found around 9:30 that the second-to-last outstanding physical fault, a connector in the right side secondary harness that had been pulled loose during the impact, was simpler than he'd expected. The connector housing was intact. The issue was a single lock tab that had failed, letting the connector unseat under the harness tension. He seated it, secured it with a supplemental retention clip from the shop's supply drawer, and tested continuity. Clean. 4 faults remaining. 3 of them physical. 1 was the body cosmetics, which was the least urgent thing. The control arm and bearing work was the most labor-intensive part of the morning. The new left control arm required precise alignment, not just installed but positioned correctly within the suspension geometry, or all you'd done was create a new problem. Lucas measured twice, checked against the schematic dimensions, adjusted the positioning by small increments. It was slow work. He didn't rush it. "You're not eating," Patty observed around 11. "I had coffee." "That's not food." "I know." She went to the Vietnamese place and came back with 2 portions of something that smelled considerably better than the sandwiches from the night before. Lucas ate standing up, which Patty disapproved of but said nothing about, while running through his mental list of remaining tasks. The bearing. The brake system check. A precaution, given the impact. The final harness sections. The panel alignment. And then the real question, would the car actually run? The engine itself appeared undamaged. No cooling system impact, no visible component damage, no fault codes related to the powertrain. But appearing undamaged and being undamaged were 2 different things, and until the car was started and running under load, there was a margin of uncertainty he couldn't eliminate by looking at it. "What time is Hayes coming?" Patty asked. "Sometime after noon." "What do you want me to do when she gets here?" Lucas thought about it. "Just keep working." Victoria Hayes arrived at 1:17 p.m. Lucas had an image in his head of her, assembled from the photograph he'd seen once in the business section and the general impression created by Derek's description of her. He'd expected polished, corporate, the particular kind of controlled competence that certain CEOs cultivated like a second skin. She was polished, but it wasn't the kind that made people keep their distance. She was 30 years old and moved with the quick, deliberate energy of someone who had learned early that time was the actual scarcest resource. Not money, not attention, time. She wore dark slacks and a light jacket and very good shoes that she did not seem particularly concerned about in the environment of a working auto shop, which was the first thing that Lucas noticed about her. The second thing was that she looked tired. Not the performative tiredness of someone making a show of how hard they worked. Real tired, the kind that lived behind the eyes. Derek was with her. He made the introduction with the careful formality of a man standing between two people he was slightly nervous about. "Lucas Bennett," he said. "Victoria Hayes." They shook hands. Her grip was direct and brief. She looked at the car. Lucas watched her look at it. He was interested in what people's faces did when they saw something that had been damaged. Whether they saw the damage or saw the thing underneath the damage. Her face was hard to read, but her eyes moved over the car the way someone's eyes moved over something they cared about. Not just as a possession, as something with meaning attached to it. "It looks different," she said finally. "Different how?" Lucas asked. She was quiet for a moment, still looking. "When I saw it after the transport, it looked like a problem without a solution. Right now it looks like a problem that someone's actually working on." She glanced at him. "That sounds stupid." "It doesn't," he said. She walked to the left side, looked at the suspension repair. "Derek told me what you found, the pin." "Yeah, one pin." "In the right location," Lucas said, which is most of what made it dangerous. It was sitting exactly where the ECU's primary communication path ran. One intermittent connection there, and the whole reporting system went down. She considered this. The other shops missed it. They had no reason to look that specifically for that kind of fault. The diagnostic output told them 47 things were wrong, so they started working on 47 things. Reasonable approach, honestly. But wrong. Wrong for this particular situation. She looked at him for a moment, not in the evaluating hierarchical way of someone assessing whether you're worth their time, more like someone trying to figure out how a specific thing worked. "How did you know to look at it differently?" Lucas thought about how to answer that. It was a question that didn't have a clean answer. Not a method he'd read in a manual, not a technique from a training course. "The timestamps on the error codes," he said. "Everything failed simultaneously. That's not how multiple independent failures happen. So either something catastrophic happened to the ECU itself, but the ECU was physically intact, or there was one failure point that the ECU was reading as everything failing. From there, it was just finding it." "Just," she said with a slight edge that wasn't quite sarcasm. "It took a while," he admitted. "It took the other shops 4 days collectively before they gave up." "I wasn't going to give up," he said. "Not defensively, just factually." She looked at him for another second. Then she looked back at the car. "Will it run?" "I believe so. We'll know more when we're ready to start it. The powertrain looks clean. The systems are coming back correctly. The physical repairs are close to done." He paused. "But I won't tell you it's guaranteed until I know it's guaranteed." "I appreciate that," she said. "Everyone else guaranteed me things they couldn't guarantee." She walked the full length of the car slowly, the way Lucas had done the previous day when he was first building his picture of it. He found he didn't feel the need to narrate what she was seeing. She was clearly someone who looked at things directly. Derek hovered near the garage door with the practiced unease of a man in dress shoes in an auto shop, making small talk with Marcus about nothing in particular. Patty continued working on the body panel alignment with focused indifference to the visitors, which was very much her style. Victoria stopped in the rear of the car and looked at the exhaust system. Undamaged, clean, carbon ceramic tips that had somehow come through the incident without a scratch. "This was my first real purchase after the company's Series A," she said. Not really to Lucas. More thinking out loud. "I know that sounds..." She stopped. "It probably sounds irresponsible." "None of my business," Lucas said. "I'd been working 18-hour days for 2 years. I hadn't bought anything for myself. And then one morning I woke up and thought..." She shook her head slightly. "Anyway, it sounds irresponsible." "Sounds like something you wanted," Lucas said. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not softened exactly, but opened a fraction. "Yeah," she said. "Something I wanted." She was quiet for a moment. "My father used to fix cars," she said. "Old ones. Not as a profession, as a thing he did. Saturday mornings, I'd sit in the garage and watch him. He could look at an engine for 10 minutes and then just know, like he was reading something nobody else could see." Lucas said nothing. He knew the kind of mechanic she was describing. He'd grown up watching one. That's what Derek said about you, Victoria said, that you looked at things until you understood them. Derek is generous. He said it like a fact, she said. A silence that was not particularly uncomfortable settled between them. Somewhere outside, a truck was reversing on the service road, the repetitive warning beep fading as it moved away. What do you need from me to finish it? Victoria asked, shifting back into the register of someone accustomed to making decisions. Time, Lucas said. And the panel work, the body cosmetics. I can handle the structural and mechanical repairs in shop, the cosmetic restoration, the repaint on the front sections. There's a body shop I trust. I'd want to send those panels there rather than do the work here. My facility isn't set up for that quality of finish. She nodded. Whatever it needs. I'll put together a complete scope and cost breakdown. Derek can send it to me directly, she said. Derek doesn't need to be in the middle of every conversation. She said it without any edge toward Derek, just practically. Lucas appreciated the directness of it. I can do that, he said. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a card. Physical, paper, the kind that most people her age in her industry had stopped carrying 3 years ago. She held it out. He took it. Plain white black text. Her name, a phone number, an email. Nothing else. He found that more interesting than an elaborate design would have been. When do you think? She asked. Lucas looked at the car, thought through the remaining work, measured it honestly, without the instinct to either inflate or minimize. End of today for the mechanical completion. Engine start, system verification. If that goes well, and I believe it will, the car will be operational. The cosmetic panels, the body restoration, that's a few more days, but that's a different category of work. The car will run long before it's fully beautiful again. Running is what matters right now, she said. Then end of today, he said. She nodded once. Looked at the car one more time with that particular expression. Not quite tenderness, but something adjacent to it. Thank you, Mr. Bennett, she said. Lucas, he said. Lucas? She almost smiled. Thank you. Boy, after Victoria and Derek left, the garage felt like itself again. Marcus exhaled audibly and stretched his arms over his head. She's intense, he said. She's focused, Patty said from behind the panel she was working on. There's a difference. Easy to get those confused when you're in the room with it, Marcus said. Lucas had already moved back to the car, crouching beside the right side to begin the bearing replacement. The conversation with Victoria had taken 40 minutes he hadn't planned on, and the afternoon was going to require concentrated work to hit the target he'd given her. He didn't have time to process the visit in any useful way, so he did the thing he always did with things he didn't have time for. He set it aside and got back to work. The bearing replacement was straightforward work, but painstaking. The kind that punished impatience with misalignment and punished misalignment with noise or worse at speed. He worked through it methodically, checking tolerances, not cutting any corners on the press fit, even when the press fit was resistant and his hands were getting tired. Around 2:45, Patty called over from where she was working. Left panel is as close as I can get it without specialist equipment. There's a slight gap at the top of the arch that the body shop is going to have to address. Document it, Lucas said. Photograph it. I'll include it in the report. Already did. Of course she had. Marcus was doing the brake system inspection, a task Lucas had delegated to him specifically because Marcus was meticulous about brake work in a way he wasn't always meticulous about other things. He went through it quietly, checking components and fluid, running through the inspection protocol without being pushed. At 3:30, Marcus looked up from the driver's side caliper. Brakes are solid, no damage I can find, fluid's clean. Front right rotor? Clean. Impact didn't reach it. Lucas nodded. That was the last major mechanical concern off the list. He sat back for a moment and reviewed where they were. Bearing installed and torqued correctly. Control arm in proper alignment. Harness inspection complete. 2 additional minor issues found and addressed in the final sections. Nothing significant. Brake system confirmed clean. Body panels documented. What remained was the test. The actual startup. The moment the car would either come alive or tell him something he'd missed. He was aware of a low-level tension in his chest that he didn't acknowledge out loud and didn't try to manage. It was just there. The reasonable anxiety of a person who had committed to something and was about to find out whether he'd been right. You want to run it? Patty asked. She'd come to stand beside him, both of them looking at the car. Yeah, he said. When? He looked at the shop clock. 3:47 p.m. Give me another 40 minutes. I want to do a full pre-start check. Make sure I haven't missed anything. She nodded. I'll prep the monitoring equipment. He spent the 40 minutes doing exactly what he said. A methodical pre-start inspection, working from the engine bay outward. Coolant level. Oil level. Brake fluid. No loose connections in the engine bay. Accessory belt properly tensioned. Intake clear. He checked the wiring in the engine compartment specifically, tracing the major connections, looking for anything the initial inspection might have overlooked. He found nothing wrong. He stood up, rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles, and looked at the car one more time. All right, he said to no one in particular. He connected his laptop to the OBD port one final time. He wanted live data running when the engine started so he could monitor every system in real time as it came up. He checked that the monitoring software was live. He checked the fault code list. 5 items, all logged but cleared, no active faults currently showing. He opened the driver's door. The McLaren's interior was something he hadn't spent much time paying attention to. There hadn't been a reason to. But sitting in the driver's seat now, he noticed it in the way you notice things when the context shifts. The Alcantara steering wheel, the digital instrument cluster, dark and dormant, the gear selector, the ignition button, surrounded by a red-lit ring that was the only light in the cabin. The seat was set for a driver several inches taller than him. He didn't adjust it. He put his hand on the ignition button. The garage was very quiet. Patty stood near the workbench with the monitoring laptop open. Marcus had stopped what he was doing and was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, watching. They'd both seen Lucas start a difficult car before. Both knew what this moment meant. Lucas looked at the dashboard. He thought about a pin in section L7, about the timestamp on 47 error codes, about his daughter's voice on the phone. Nothing is impossible once someone decides to start. About Claire. He thought about Claire too, though he couldn't have said exactly why. Just that she was there, the way she was always somehow there at the moments when things mattered. He pressed the button. The McLaren's engine turned over. For a single terrible second, it hesitated. Then it caught. And the sound that came out of that machine, even in a small garage on a service road behind a strip mall in a city nobody had ever put on a map and said this is a place where remarkable things happen, that sound was something else. A low building thunder that filled the space completely, vibrated in the chest, climbed in pitch as the engine came alive, and the systems fed each other, and the entire car shuddered once like something that had been holding its breath for a very long time. The instrument cluster lit up. Lucas watched the fault codes on his laptop screen. They did not return. Every system came online clean. Suspension, operational. Chassis management, operational. Stability control, operational. Powertrain, operational. The active exhaust note settled into a steady, powerful idle that bounced off the garage walls and out the open door into the afternoon. "Oh," Marcus said from across the garage, and the word came out quiet in a way that meant something entirely different from when Marcus was being casual. Patty's expression didn't change much, but she exhaled slowly through her nose, and she looked at Lucas through the windshield, and she nodded once. Lucas sat in the driver's seat of the running car with his hands on the wheel and the engine alive beneath him and felt the vibration of it. Not just physical, but something else, some harder-to-name thing, moving through him. He let it run for 90 seconds, watching the data. Temperature climbing correctly, fuel pressure steady, no new codes, no anomalies. Just a car, working exactly the way it was supposed to work. Then he shut it off. The garage went quiet again. The silence after that engine felt enormous. He climbed out, stood beside the car. His back still ached and his knuckles were cracked and dry, and there was grease under his fingernails that wasn't coming out without a proper scrub. He was hungry and tired, and the day had hours still to go. The write-up, the cost documentation, the shop cleanup, the drive home. But the car ran. "Well," Patty said. "Yeah," Lucas said. Marcus pushed off the wall and walked over, hands still in his pockets, and stood looking at the car. "We're telling people about this," he said. "We're finishing the documentation first," Lucas said. "Then we'll talk about what we're telling people." "Still," Marcus said, "that was—" He stopped, looked at Lucas. "You knew, didn't you? When you found the pin, you knew it was going to run. Lucas considered the question honestly. I believed it would, he said. That's not the same as knowing. Close enough, Marcus said. It wasn't close enough. But Lucas understood what Marcus meant, and this wasn't the moment to split the distinction. He picked up his phone and called Victoria Hayes. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been near the phone. He noted that. It runs, he said. A silence on the other end. Short, but real. You're serious, she said. I'm always serious when I say something's done. Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice was different, not by much, just a fraction of the control she usually maintained, enough to let something else show through. I thought Derek was going to call me tonight to tell me it needed another week. It doesn't need another week, Lucas said. The mechanical work is complete. The car is operational. The body cosmetics still need the specialty shop. I'll send you the panel documentation with my full report tonight. But you asked me when it would run. He paused. It runs now. She was quiet for a moment. Then, thank you, Lucas. I'll send the report tonight, he said. You can come see it whenever works for you. Tomorrow morning, she said, without hesitation. I'll be here, he said. He ended the call, set the phone on the workbench, looked at the car, looked at Patty, who was already starting to organize the removed components for documentation. Okay, he said. Let's close this out properly. They worked for another 2 hours. Documentation, cleanup, component inventory, the detailed write-up that every repair of this complexity required. Lucas wrote the cost estimate for Victoria by hand first, then transferred it to the invoice template on his laptop. He photographed everything that needed photographing, annotated the schematic with the faults he'd found and the repairs performed, cross-referenced the parts used. It was work that nobody ever saw, but that mattered, because it was the proof. The record that said not just that the job was done, but how it was done, and why every decision had been made the way it was made. At 6:10, he locked the shop, drove to Diane Chen's house to collect Ava, and found her already waiting on the steps with her backpack, which was a change from yesterday. She looked at him when he got out of the truck with the assessing expression she'd developed over the past year, older than her age slightly, the one where she was reading how the day had gone before he said a word. It ran, he said, across the hood of the truck. Her face did something that was trying not to be a full smile and not quite succeeding. I know it ran, she said. Marcus texted me. I'm going to talk to Marcus about texting you, Lucas said. You say that every time. She climbed into the truck. Are you hungry? Very. Diane sent leftovers. She held up a container. She said you forget to eat when you're working. Diane is perceptive, he said, starting the truck. She's a mom, Ava said, as if that explained everything. He thought about saying something to that, but found he didn't have the words for it right now. He just pulled out of the driveway and headed home through the ordinary streets of the ordinary city where, a few hours ago, something that everyone had said was impossible had started its engine and roared. Ava ate half of Diane's leftovers in the truck and handed the rest to him at a red light without being asked. He ate with one hand on the wheel, the food warm and better than anything he'd managed to put together for himself all day. They drove home in the almost quiet. The city doing what cities do at this hour. Lights coming on in windows. The last of the commuters on the road. The long, soft exhale of a weekday giving way to evening. Victoria Hayes arrived at 8:47 the next morning. Lucas had been there since 7. Not because he'd planned to be early. He was always early. The same way the alarm always went off at 5:14. The same way the coffee machine always needed propping slightly to the right. Some things just happened in a particular order and had for long enough that they'd stopped feeling like choices. He'd spent the first 40 minutes doing something he almost never did. Standing outside the garage with his coffee, leaning against the exterior wall in the early morning, not working. Just existing for a minute in the cool air before the day demanded things from him. The service road was quiet at this hour. The Vietnamese place didn't open until 11. The storage facility was its usual cryptic self. A pigeon was investigating something near the dumpster at the end of the lot with great seriousness of purpose. He thought about the car, not in the anxious way of the previous 2 days, not tracing electrical pathways or running system sequences in his head. Just thinking about it the way you think about something that surprised you. He'd been confident, or something like confident, but confidence and certainty weren't the same thing, and the moment that engine had hesitated before catching, that single, terrible half-second of silence had revealed exactly how much uncertainty he'd been carrying under the surface. More than he'd acknowledged to himself. Probably more than he'd acknowledged to Patty or Marcus or Victoria Hayes. The thing about working on something that everyone else had given up on was that the weight of their giving up wasn't neutral. It sat on you. It whispered reasonable things. They had more resources than you. They had better equipment. They had factory-trained technicians with manufacturer support lines. And all of those things were true, and all of them were beside the point. But being beside the point didn't make them quiet. What had made them quiet was a timestamp. 47 error codes generated in 2 seconds. He finished his coffee, went inside, and began preparing the garage for Victoria's visit. Not staging it, not cleaning it beyond its normal working condition, just making sure the car was accessible and the documentation was organized and the diagnostic equipment was ready if she wanted to see a live system scan. He was under the hood doing a final check on a coolant hose clamp he'd noticed the previous afternoon when he heard the car pull up. A white Model S. She got out wearing what appeared to be the same dark slacks as yesterday, with a different jacket, charcoal this time, and carrying a coffee from somewhere that was not a gas station. She walked into the garage with the same quick, purposeful stride, looked at the McLaren, and then looked at Lucas. "Morning?" she said. "Morning." She walked directly to the car, not slowly, not circling the way she had yesterday. She went to the driver's side door and looked through the window at the instrument cluster, the steering wheel, the interior that was intact and undamaged in ways the exterior wasn't. "Can I sit in it?" she asked. "It's your car," he said. She opened the door and sat in the driver's seat. Didn't start it, just sat there, hands on the wheel, looking at the dashboard. Lucas watched from a respectful distance, doing the thing he did when a customer needed a moment with their vehicle, which happened more than people outside the industry would expect. Cars meant things to people. The meaning wasn't always rational, but it was real. After maybe 30 seconds, she said, "Start it again. I want to hear it from in here." He came around to the passenger side, leaned in through the open door, reached across and pressed the ignition button. The engine came alive exactly as it had the previous evening. That low building thunder, the cabin filling with controlled power, the instrument cluster lighting up clean and complete with no warnings, no fault indicators, just a car doing what it was made to do. Victoria sat with her hands on the wheel and the engine running, and she didn't say anything for a while. Lucas straightened up and stood outside the passenger door, looking at the garage wall, giving her the privacy of the moment without physically leaving. She let it run for nearly 2 minutes. Then she reached over and shut it off, sat for another few seconds in the silence. She got out of the car. Her expression had done something since she'd sat down, something small but visible, the way certain tight things relax when the reason for their tightness resolves. She looked at Lucas. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She said it twice, like she was confirming something to herself. "The report is on the workbench," Lucas said. "Everything documented, of faults found, repairs performed, components replaced. What's pending on the cosmetic side?" She walked to the workbench. He'd printed the report and clipped it with the photographs he'd taken throughout the process. 12 pages total, thorough enough that any other mechanic could read it and understand exactly what had happened and why. She picked it up and read it with the focused attention of someone who actually read documents rather than scanning them. He watched her flip through it slowly, pausing at the technical sections, looking at the photographs. "The pin," she said, stopping at the page where he'd photographed the section L7 connector junction. "That's it?" "That's it," he said. "The small white arrow in the photograph is pointing at pin 7 in the 12-pin cluster. The deformation was subtle enough that it passed visual inspection. The only way to find it was through resistance testing and knowing what you were looking for." "And you knew what you were looking for because of the timestamp." "Because of the timestamp," he confirmed. She stared at the photograph for a moment longer than the others. Then she flipped to the next page. She read the invoice last, which was either instinct or deliberate. He couldn't tell which. She looked at the number, looked at it again. He'd been fair. More than fair, honestly. Patty had told him so when she'd reviewed the draft the night before, with the particular directness she used when she thought he was undervaluing his own work. He'd told her the number was right, and she'd told him the number was modest, and they'd left it there. The parts costs were at cost, the labor rate was his standard rate, and he hadn't added anything for the complexity or the urgency or the fact that he'd solved something 3 other shops had failed to solve. He'd just charged for the work. "This is less than Southwest's estimate," Victoria said. "Southwest's estimate was for 6 months of work," Lucas said. "This wasn't 6 months of work. It also isn't what most shops would charge for what you actually did." "I charged for what I did," he said, "not for what it looked like from the outside." She looked at him for a moment. Then she set the report down on the workbench. "I want to double it," she said. "No," he said. She blinked. Not many people, he suspected, said no to Victoria Hayes in a tone that carried no apology with it. "The invoice is accurate," he said. "I don't charge people more than what the work is worth." "You solved something that—" "I know what I solved," he said, not unkindly, "and I've priced it correctly. If you want to refer other work to me, that's how you say thank you, but I won't take double the invoice." A silence in which Victoria Hayes appeared to be recalibrating. She had the expression of someone who operated in an environment where everything was a negotiation and had just encountered a position that genuinely wasn't. "You're serious," she said. "I'm always serious about the invoice," he said. "It's the one piece of paper in this business where honesty matters most." She picked up the report again, folded it, held it for a moment. "All right," she said, "but I'm paying it today. Not net 30. "That's fine," he said. She pulled out her phone. He gave her the payment information. The transaction took 45 seconds. Then she stood in the garage and looked at the car for a moment, and something shifted in the air between them. The formal register of the transaction settling into something more ordinary. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Why did you take this job?" He thought about the honest answer and decided it was the right one. "Because Derek asked, and I didn't have a good reason not to." She almost smiled. "That's not the inspiring version of the story." "No," he agreed. "And when you found the pin, when you figured out it was one thing and not 47, what did that feel like?" He thought about that moment. Sitting back on his heels in the quiet garage, his back aching, the clock saying 7:19, the pinhole of the actual problem finally visible after hours of systematic elimination. "Like finding the one sentence in a book that makes the rest of it make sense," he said. She looked at him steadily. "My father would have understood that," she said. It was the second time she'd mentioned her father. Both times it had come with a particular quality, not grief exactly, but weight. He didn't push at it. "The body panels should be ready from the specialty shop in 3 days," he said, returning to the practical. "Carrera's doing the paint work. They're the best in the region for this kind of finish. When that's done, it'll look exactly the way it looked before. Will you coordinate with them?" "If you want me to." "I want you to," she said. "You're the one who understands what happened to it." He nodded. "I'll call them today." She picked up her coffee, which had gone cool during the visit. She took a sip of it anyway, the way people do when they're thinking about something other than the coffee. "Bennett Auto Repair," she said, almost to herself, looking at the weathered plywood sign above the garage door. "How long have you been here?" 8 years. "Just you and 2 employees?" 2 employees, yes. "And before this?" She gestured at the McLaren. "What's the biggest job you've done?" He thought. 2019 Porsche Turbo S with a complete electrical rebuild after a flood event. Before that, an Aston Martin DB11 with a failed hydraulic system. The previous shop's repair had made it worse before it came to me. "So, high-end cars?" "Occasionally. Most of the work is regular vehicles. The high-end ones come through sometimes." She nodded slowly. She had an expression he recognized from certain clients. The one where they were calculating something beyond the immediate transaction, assembling a larger picture that they hadn't shared yet. He had been in enough business situations, even in the context of an auto shop, to know what that expression usually preceded. He waited. "I'm going to put your name out," she said, "to people I know, other people who have cars like this and need work they can trust." She said it straightforwardly, without the inflated language of a grand gesture, just a statement of intention. "That's not a negotiation. You can decide what you do with the referrals." "I appreciate it," he said. "It's not charity," she said, with a slight edge. "You earned it." "I know," he said. "I appreciate it the same." She held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded. "I'll be in touch about the panels." She picked up her keys from where she'd set them on the workbench. "You'll call me when it's ready?" "I'll call you." She walked out. A minute later, the white Model S backed out of the service road and disappeared toward the main street. Lucas stood in the middle of his garage, looking at the orange McLaren. Then he picked up his phone and called Carrera to arrange the panel work. Tick. Patty arrived at 9 and he told her about the visit in approximately 40 words, which was roughly the appropriate number for a debrief of that kind. She listened, nodded, and started the day's actual scheduled work. A Subaru Outback with a transmission issue that had been waiting since Monday. Marcus arrived at 9:14, which Lucas noted and did not comment on, and was unusually quiet for the first hour. Around 10:30, while he was working on an oil change and Lucas was on the phone with Carrera, Marcus looked over and waited until the call ended. "Derek called me this morning," he said. Lucas looked at him. "About what?" "About this." Marcus gestured at the McLaren. He said, and I'm quoting here, that the Victoria Hayes thing is going to be a thing. What does that mean? He said she told 2 people last night, called them, at night. And those people apparently run in circles where this kind of thing... Marcus paused, searching for the right framing. He said it travels in those circles when something happens that shouldn't have happened. Lucas absorbed this. He went back to the invoice he was working on for the Subaru. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Marcus stared at him. "That's all?" "What do you want me to say, Marcus?" "I don't know. Something. Like maybe, wow, our lives might be about to change. Or at minimum, some acknowledgement that this is not a normal Tuesday. It's Wednesday," Lucas said. Marcus threw his hands up slightly and went back to the oil change. Patty, without looking up from the Subaru. "He's aware, Marcus. He just doesn't perform awareness." "That is an extremely specific and accurate thing to say about him," Marcus said. Lucas, writing the invoice, said nothing. He was aware. He was more aware than either of them knew, probably. The difference was that awareness without confirmed facts was just speculation, and speculation was a thing Lucas had never found much use for. Victoria had said she'd put his name out. He'd said he appreciated it. What happened after that was not something he could control or particularly usefully worry about, and he had a Subaru transmission to diagnose. The day proceeded in its normal manner. Work, phone calls, a parts supplier issue that required 20 minutes on hold and a firm conversation about lead times, lunch eaten too fast at the workbench, an afternoon that moved in the particular way that productive days moved, where you looked up and it was somehow 4 p.m. At 4:23, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, area code he didn't know. He almost let it go to voicemail. He took calls he didn't recognize maybe once in 10 times, and the other 9 times it was either a wrong number or someone wanting to extend his vehicle's warranty. But something made him answer it. Bennett Auto Repair. "Is this Lucas Bennett?" A man's voice. Mid-40s, maybe. A particular quality to it, the kind of voice that was accustomed to being taken seriously. "Speaking. My name is Robert Calloway. I'm calling because a mutual connection, Victoria Hayes, mentioned your shop to me this morning. I understand you recently resolved a significant issue with her McLaren." Lucas put down the pen he was holding. "I completed a repair, yes." "I'll be brief because I imagine you're busy and I have a meeting in 10 minutes. I have a Koenigsegg Jesko that's been sitting at a facility in Phoenix for the better part of 2 months. It came out of a major service with an intermittent power delivery issue that nobody has been able to resolve. The manufacturer's technical team has been involved. 3 independent specialists have looked at it." A pause. "Victoria said that describing something as impossible to you is counterproductive, that you tend to take it as an invitation." Lucas looked at the workbench in front of him, looked at the Subaru transmission sitting disassembled in neat sections on the spread tarpaulin, looked at the McLaren in its bay, operational and waiting for its panels. A Koenigsegg Jesko. A car that made the McLaren look like a practical commuter vehicle, one of fewer than 200 in existence worldwide. A machine with an engine that produced power figures that sounded theoretical. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I'll be honest with you. I've never worked on a Koenigsegg. I'm aware of that. And I don't have manufacturer diagnostic access for their systems. Also aware. So you understand that I'd be working from first principles, largely, without the support infrastructure those other specialists had." "Mr. Bennett," Calloway said, and there was something dry and direct in his tone that Lucas found he respected immediately. Those other specialists and their support infrastructure have had 2 months and produced no result. Whatever first principles you're working from, they appear to be functional. A pause. Would you be willing to look at it? Lucas was quiet for a moment. He thought about his shop. The 2 bays, the 3 of them, the plywood sign with the faded letters. He thought about what he'd said to Derek when Derek had called 2 days ago. I don't have the proprietary diagnostic software for McLaren systems, or the specialized tooling. And then he'd found the pin in section L7. Have it brought here, he said. I'll look at it. Excellent, Calloway said. I'll have my logistics coordinator call you for the address and timing. Before your meeting, Lucas said. A brief pause. Then, with something that might have been amusement, I'll make time. He hung up. Set the phone down on the workbench. Patty was looking at him from across the shop with an expression of patient inquiry. Koenigsegg, Lucas said. She looked at him for a moment. Jesco? Yeah. Where's it at? Phoenix. How long's it been sitting? 2 months, intermittent power delivery issue. Patty turned back to the Subaru. She picked up her wrench. Then, without looking up, you're going to need the advanced waveform oscilloscope. I'll order one tonight. You don't even know what the issue is, he said. Neither do you, she said. But if 3 specialists and the manufacturer couldn't find it with standard diagnostics, you're going to need better signal analysis. Get ahead of it. He looked at her. She continued working on the Subaru with the same focus she brought to everything, as if she hadn't just demonstrated more quiet confidence in him than he'd demonstrated in himself. Okay, he said. Order it. He picked Ava up from school at the regular time. She got in the truck and immediately looked at his face with that reading the room expression. Good day or complicated day, she asked. Complicated, he said. But good complicated. She accepted this as a complete answer, which he appreciated. She told him about school. There had been a situation at lunch involving someone spilling chocolate milk on someone else's backpack, the resulting conflict having apparently divided her social circle into factions, and the geopolitical landscape of 6th grade was consequently unstable. He listened with genuine attention, asked questions about the people involved, and offered no opinions because he'd learned that offering opinions about 6th grade social situations almost always made things worse in ways that became apparent approximately 72 hours later. At home, he made dinner, pasta, a sauce from a jar he supplemented with garlic and onion, and whatever produce needed using, which turned out to be half a bell pepper and some spinach that was getting philosophical about its future. Ava set the table without being asked, which happened about 60% of the time, and which he had learned to appreciate without commenting on, because commenting on it seemed to reduce the frequency. They ate. Dad, Ava said, halfway through dinner. Yeah. Maya's mom said you fixed some famous car. It's not famous, it's expensive. She said it was a McLaren. Diane Chen knows what a McLaren is? Her boyfriend does. She told him, and she said he kind of freaked out. Ava twirled pasta with the focused inefficiency of someone who hadn't yet mastered the fork against spoon technique. She said the car was broken so badly that real specialists said it couldn't be fixed. Specialists said it would take a long time, Lucas said. That's different from can't be fixed. Ava looked at him. Did you fix it? I fixed what was broken, he said. Yeah. She chewed, thought. How long did it take? Day and a half, more or less. She was quiet for a moment. Then, without drama, without fanfare, in the completely matter-of-fact tone of someone stating a simple truth, I knew you could. You didn't know anything about it, he said. I knew you could, she repeated, as if his objection was a technical point she was choosing to disregard. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table. The overhead light was the slightly too harsh variety of rental house kitchens. It showed everything without flattering anything. And Ava sat in it with her choppy ponytail and her soccer hoodie and pasta sauce on her chin that she hadn't noticed yet, and she said the things she said with the absolute unshakable certainty of someone who had never once in her 11 years doubted that her father could do the thing in front of him. He didn't know exactly whether he'd earned that certainty or simply inherited it. Probably both. Probably it was one of those things that worked in both directions. She believed in him, so he became the person she believed in. Claire had been the same way. Not naively. She'd known his limitations, had told him about them with complete honesty when she thought he needed to hear it. But the belief underneath was bedrock. It didn't shift. "You have pasta sauce on your chin," he said. She grabbed her napkin. "Embarrassing," she said without embarrassment. "Very," he agreed. They finished dinner. He washed the dishes while she sat at the table and worked on something for school, and the kitchen had the warm, slightly cluttered quality of a room that was used by people who actually lived in it. And outside the window, the spring evening was settling in, the sky going from blue to a layered violet gray. His phone buzzed on the counter. He dried his hands and looked at it. A text from a number he'd added that afternoon. Robert Calloway. "Logistics coordinating the Jesco transport. Confirming your address for collection from Phoenix. Expect delivery Thursday or Friday depending on transport routing. Thank you for taking this on." He read it twice. Set the phone back on the counter. "Who was it?" Ava asked, without looking up. "Work thing," he said. "The McLaren lady?" "Different car." She looked up now. "Different expensive car?" "Yes." She studied him for a second. "You should raise your prices," she said, and went back to her work. He stood at the kitchen sink for a moment, looking at nothing, the damp dish towel in his hand. Then he laughed. A small, real laugh that surprised him a little, the kind that came up without warning, from somewhere lower than thought. "Go do your homework," he said. "I'm doing it," she said. He went to the living room and sat down and pulled out his own laptop, the shop one, not that he had a personal one, and began doing the thing he'd been putting off all day, which was research. If a Koenigsegg Jesco was coming to his bay, he was going to know everything he could know about it before it arrived. The electrical architecture, the fuel system, the power delivery logic, the known failure modes. He would read everything public, study every schematic he could access, absorb as much as he could so that when the car arrived, he wasn't starting from zero. He worked at it for 2 hours. His back started to complain around the 90-minute mark, and he ignored it. His eyes were tired, and the laptop screen was too bright in the dim living room, and he ignored that too. At 9:45, he made Ava stop working and go to bed. She went without argument, which told him she was more tired than she was admitting. He stood in the hallway outside her door for a moment after she'd turned her light out. "Hey," he said through the door. From inside. "The impossible part of this week," he said. "The car. The people calling. Yeah? It's happening because we kept doing the work," he said. "Not because of luck or the right moment or any of that. Just because we kept doing the work even when it was hard. Okay?" A pause from inside, then, "Dad?" "Yeah. I know. You've been doing the work my whole life." He stood in the hallway. The water heater in the closet at the end of the hall made its sound. The one it had been making since March. The one he hadn't fixed yet. The streetlight outside was casting its familiar strip of orange light across the hallway floor through the window at the end. He didn't say anything else. Just went to bed. Tease. Thursday arrived the way Thursdays did. Not different from the outside, not heralding itself. Just the next day in the sequence. The alarm at 5:14, the coffee, the toast, the junk drawer. He dropped Ava at school and drove to the shop and unlocked it, and for a few minutes stood in the empty bay and thought about where they were. The McLaren. The Koenigsegg in transit. Robert Calloway's tone on the phone. Victoria's statement that she was putting his name out. The oscilloscope Patty had ordered, arriving tomorrow. None of it had changed the basic facts of his life yet. Rent was still due in 8 days. The water heater still needed attention. His truck still had 214,000 miles on it and a cracked taillight. But something had shifted. He could feel it the way you could sometimes feel a change in weather before it was visible. A pressure difference, a quality in the air. He wasn't a superstitious person. He didn't count on things that hadn't happened. He'd learned, through years of the kind of specific difficulty that being the only parent and the only income produces, that hope was useful only when it was attached to action. So he did what he did. He picked up his tools. He looked at the work in front of him. Marcus came in at 9, on time, which Lucas noted with a raised eyebrow that Marcus caught and responded to by rolling his eyes. And they spent the morning on the Subaru transmission, which was a puzzle of a different kind, less dramatic than the McLaren, but requiring the same careful attention to what was actually wrong rather than what appeared to be wrong. Around 11 a.m., Derek Fuentes called. "I need to tell you something," Derek said, and he sounded again like a man navigating a situation he hadn't fully anticipated. "Okay," Lucas said. "The automotive community in this region, the high-end side of it, the collectors, the people with the serious cars, it's a small world. You understand that, right? Those people talk to each other? You said something similar when you called about the McLaren." "Right, but I mean, it's happening faster than I expected," Derek said. "Victoria told 2 people. One of them told 4. I got 3 calls yesterday from people asking about you, and this morning I got a call from a journalist. Not local. She writes for a national automotive publication. She heard there was a mechanic in Delford who fixed the unfixable Hayes McLaren in under 2 days, and she wants to do a piece." Lucas stood with the phone pressed to his ear and said nothing. "Bennett," Derek said. "You there?" "I'm here." "What do you want me to tell her?" He thought about it. He thought about the shop, the plywood sign, the 2 bays, the 3 of them, and whether it could absorb that kind of attention without being changed by it in ways he didn't intend. He thought about Ava saying, "I knew you could." He thought about the Koenigsegg arriving tomorrow or Friday. "Tell her she can call me," he said. "I'll talk to her, but I can't promise anything makes it into print." "Fair enough," Derek said. Then quieter, "For what it's worth, Lucas, I've known about your shop for years, and I should have sent more work your way. I'm sorry for that." Lucas was slightly surprised by this. Derek was not a man who apologized for business decisions. "I appreciate that," he said. "I mean it. You deserved better visibility long before this week." "Let's not get sentimental," Lucas said, but he said it without edge. Derek laughed, a real laugh, not the professional variety. "Right. Call me when the Carrera panels are ready." "You heard about the Koenigsegg?" Lucas asked. "Callaway called me to verify your credentials," Derek said, with a trace of something that might have been pride. "I told him you were the most underrated mechanic in the state, and probably several adjacent states." "You're going to make me charge you more," Lucas said. "Overdue," Derek said, and hung up. Lucas put his phone in his pocket and went back to the Subaru. Patty came and stood beside him after a minute. She'd heard enough of the conversation in the way that small spaces made overhearing unavoidable. "Journalist," she said. "Yeah." "You going to talk to her?" "If she calls." Patty picked up a component from the Subaru, examined it, set it back down. "The shop's going to get busier," she said. Not a question. "Probably. We're going to need another bay, or a different facility." He looked at her. This was the furthest forward either of them had projected in quite some time. "Let's get through the Koenigsegg first," he said. "Sure," she said, "but I'm telling you now because you'll drag your feet on it otherwise, and then we'll be scrambling." "I don't drag my feet." She looked at him with an expression that required no words. "I'm deliberate," he said. She said, and went back to work. Marcus had been listening to all of this with the poorly concealed attention of someone pretending to concentrate on something else. "So," he said carefully, "are we getting a raise?" "When we're busier," Lucas said. "Define busier." "More busy than now." "Can we put a number on Marcus?" "Yeah, okay, fine." He went back to what he was doing. Then, a minute later, "For the record, I've believed in this shop the whole time." "I know you have," Lucas said. "Just wanted that noted." "Noted," Lucas said. The afternoon ran long. By the time he locked the shop and drove to get Ava, the light was already amber and low, the particular gold of late afternoon in early May that made ordinary things look important. He sat at a red light and felt the day's accumulation in his body. The good heaviness of actual work, the low thrum of things moving that hadn't moved before. Ava was waiting on the curb. She got in, dropped her bag, looked at him. "Normal day?" she asked. He pulled into traffic. "No," he said, "but I'm beginning to think normal isn't really what we're aimed at." She considered this. Outside her window, the city passed. The gas stations, the apartment blocks, the lit windows, the ordinary world going about its ordinary evening. "Was it ever?" she asked. He thought about that for the rest of the drive home. He didn't have an answer, but it felt like exactly the right question. The Koenigsegg arrived on Friday morning at 10:40, and it arrived the way that certain things arrive, without particular ceremony, on a flatbed driven by a man named Terry, who was eating a bag of pretzels and listening to country radio, and seemed genuinely unbothered by the fact that the cargo behind him was worth more than most houses in Delford. Lucas had been watching for the truck since 9. He wouldn't have admitted this to Patty or Marcus, but he checked the service road 3 times between 9 and 10:30 under various pretexts, checking the dumpster situation, looking at whether the strip mall behind them had gotten a new tenant in the vacant unit, standing outside with his coffee for longer than the coffee warranted. When the flatbed finally turned in, he was genuinely inside working on a brake job and had to be told by Marcus, who appeared in the bay doorway with the expression of someone delivering news they found personally significant. "It's here," Marcus said. "I know," Lucas said. "You don't look like you know. You look like you're doing a brake job." "I am doing a brake job. The Koenigsegg is in the service road." Lucas set down the caliper he was holding, wiped his hands on the shop rag, and walked out. He'd looked at photographs. He'd spent 2 evenings reading everything publicly available about the Jesco, the technical documentation, the engineering breakdowns, the owner accounts, the Koenigsegg factory service manuals that existed in fragmented form across various automotive forms. He thought he'd built a reasonable picture. The picture was insufficient. The car on the flatbed was a deep iridescent blue that changed character depending on the angle. Almost black in shadow, almost electric in direct light. It was low and wide in the way of things designed aerodynamically, rather than for the comfort of the people inside them, and it had the particular quality of certain machines where the design didn't feel decorative but functional, where every surface was there for a reason and the reason was speed. It was not damaged the way the McLaren had been damaged. From the outside, it looked essentially perfect, which Lucas knew from the McLaren meant nothing whatsoever. Terry climbed down from the cab, still working on his pretzels. He handed Lucas the clipboard and the key fob. "She runs," he said, "but rough, like something's randomly cutting out. Happens at idle sometimes, happens under load sometimes. No pattern that anyone's found." "Intermittent," Lucas said. "That's the word the Phoenix guys used," Terry confirmed. "Also some other words I probably shouldn't repeat." He signed his own copy of the paperwork and climbed back in the cab. "Good luck with it." He drove off. Lucas stood in the service road with the key fob in his hand and looked at the car. Patty came to stand beside him. She looked at the car the way she looked at everything, directly, without performance. "Intermittent power delivery," she said. "That's what Callaway said. Random. No pattern. No pattern anyone's found." She was quiet for a moment. "Intermittent faults are harder than permanent faults." "I know." "With the McLaren, the fault was there all the time. You just had to find it. This one comes and goes," Lucas said, "which means I have to catch it in the act, or find the condition that triggers it, or find the thing causing it before it expresses itself." "Or that," he agreed. Marcus had come outside and was standing slightly behind them, looking at the car with an expression he was making some effort to keep neutral. He was not entirely succeeding. "That's possibly the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said. "It's a machine," Patty said. "It's a beautiful machine." "Help me get it in the bay," Lucas said. Getting the Jesco off the flatbed and into the shop required more care than the McLaren had, because the McLaren had been visibly damaged and everyone had approached it accordingly, while the Jesco looked deceptively intact, and it was easy to forget that something was genuinely wrong with it. Lucas moved it slowly, steering by hand, Marcus guiding from outside. The car was low enough that the threshold of the garage door required careful navigation. Once it was inside, under the lights, it was a different thing again. The iridescent blue was replaced by something more metallic and immediate. Lucas walked the full circumference of it the way he had with the McLaren, building the picture, reading the geometry, understanding before touching. The Jesco was a different engineering philosophy from the McLaren. The McLaren was sophisticated. The Koenigsegg was almost philosophically extreme. Where the McLaren's engine was a masterwork of refinement, the Jesco's powertrain was something closer to controlled aggression. A 5-liter twin-turbocharged engine producing figures that required context to understand, fed by a fuel system with active management complexity that made the McLaren's electronics look like a carburetor. He stood at the engine bay for a long time. The oscilloscope Patty had ordered had arrived Thursday evening. It sat on the workbench, still in its packaging in the specific way of things that had arrived before anyone had time to open them properly. Lucas went to it now, cut the packaging, and spent 15 minutes setting it up and familiarizing himself with its interface. It was more capable than the unit he'd used before. Multiple channel inputs, real-time waveform display, the ability to capture and compare signal patterns across time intervals. For an intermittent fault, this was the difference between fishing with a net and fishing with a hook. The hook might catch nothing. The net increased the odds considerably. He connected the diagnostic interface first. The Koenigsegg's proprietary system was not McLaren's system, and he had no manufacturer access, which meant he was working through a universal interface that could read generic OBD parameters, but not the deep system data that factory tools accessed. He'd anticipated this limitation and had spent 2 evenings mapping the parameters he could access against what he needed to know. The diagnostic readout came up clean, no stored fault codes, no active flags. Of course, intermittent faults were often like this, present and absent in equal measure, leaving no trace during the quiet periods. The previous specialists had documented the fault occurring but been unable to catch it electronically, which meant it was either happening too quickly for standard logging to capture, or it was happening in a system layer that standard diagnostics couldn't reach. He set up the oscilloscope to monitor 4 channels simultaneously: the fuel injection pulse signal, the crankshaft position sensor output, the primary power supply rail to the engine management unit, and the ignition timing signal. These were the 4 most likely pathways for a power delivery fault to express itself. And if the oscilloscope was running when the fault occurred, he'd have a waveform signature to work from. Then he started the car. It started cleanly, settled into idle. The oscilloscope channels showed steady, expected waveforms, the clean square waves of the injection pulses, the regular sine of the crank sensor, the flat line of the power supply, the precise timing signal. Everything looked correct. Everything sounded correct. He let it idle for 5 minutes. It didn't fault. He revved it gently, not load, just RPM increase in neutral, watching the waveforms change shape with the increased engine speed. Everything tracked correctly. The injection pulse width changed as expected. The timing advanced appropriately. He let it come back to idle. 3 minutes later, without any input from him, the engine stumbled. It was brief, a fraction of a second, a slight roughness in the idle that smoothed itself before he'd fully registered it, but the oscilloscope had been watching, and it had caught it. He looked at the 4 channels immediately, scrolling back through the captured data to the moment of the stumble. 3 of the 4 channels showed nothing unusual. The 4th, the primary power supply rail to the engine management unit, showed a dropout, a brief sharp dip in voltage that lasted approximately 40 milliseconds before recovering. Small. Fast. The kind of thing a standard diagnostic scan would completely miss because it happened and resolved before a scan tool's logging interval could capture it. But the oscilloscope had it. There, Lucas said, to the empty garage. Patty was in the office doing administrative work. Marcus was on a test drive with the repaired Subaru. He said it to nobody, and it didn't matter because saying it made it real in a way that just thinking it didn't. A 40 millisecond voltage dropout on the ECU's primary power supply. Short enough to be invisible to standard tools, long enough to cause the ECU to momentarily reset, interrupting the fuel injection sequence, causing the stumble. The fault wasn't in the engine. It wasn't in the fuel system. It wasn't in the electronics of the engine management itself. It was in the power supply to those electronics. He shut the engine off and went to find the source. Power supply faults in modern vehicles had 2 general categories: the supply itself, the battery, the alternator, the main fuses and relays, and the wiring between the supply and the component being powered. The Jesco's battery and charging system were, according to the Phoenix facility's documentation, within specification. The main fuses were intact. That left the wiring. Specifically, the wiring between the main power distribution point and the engine management unit's dedicated supply circuit. In the Jesco, this circuit ran through a protection relay before reaching the ECU, a design choice that protected the ECU from voltage spikes, but also introduced a relay contact that could, over time or under stress, develop intermittent resistance. He found the relay after 40 minutes of systematic harness tracing. It was positioned in a location that was technically accessible but practically awkward, behind a structural brace that required partial removal in a section of the engine bay that the Phoenix facility had apparently not fully explored. The relay itself looked fine. That was the problem with relays, that they looked fine until they didn't, and the transition between those states was exactly the kind of intermittent behavior he was looking for. He got the oscilloscope probe onto the relay's output terminal, restarted the engine, and waited. The stumble came again 4 minutes later. This time he was watching the relay output. The voltage dropped, but the voltage at the relay's input terminal, the supply side, did not drop. The relay was losing contact intermittently. The internal contact surface had developed enough resistance that under certain conditions, temperature, vibration, some combination of both, it was briefly failing to conduct. He shut the engine off again. He pulled the relay, examined it. The contact surface, visible when he oriented the relay toward the light, showed the faint pitting and oxidation that came from years of switching current under load. Not catastrophic, not even visually alarming to someone not looking for it, but enough. A $23 relay, in a car that cost more than the gross domestic product of a small municipality. He set it on the workbench and looked at it. Patty had come back into the main bay at some point during the last hour. She was watching him from the office doorway. He held up the relay. She looked at it, looked at him. "That's it? That's it." She came over and took the relay from his hand, examined it, handed it back. Relay contact degradation. Progressive. Probably started mild and got worse over time. Likely triggered by heat cycling. Worse when the engine bay temperature rises, which is why it's intermittent. Cold start might be fine. Warm idle or warm with load, the contact resistance increases just enough. The Phoenix guys had it for 2 months. They were looking at the engine, the fuel system, the electronics. He set the relay on the bench. Not the relay in the power supply path. "Because relays don't fail on Koenigsegg's," Patty said, with the particular dryness of someone who had seen enough cars to know that everything failed eventually on everything. "Because it seemed too simple," Lucas said. "When something fails this intermittently and this randomly on a car this sophisticated, nobody looks at a relay. They assume it has to be something complicated. But it was simple. The cause was simple," he said. The finding it was less simple." She looked at him for a moment. "How long did it take you to find it?" He thought. He'd started the diagnostic process around 11. It was now, he checked the clock, 2:47. "About 4 hours," he said. "Phoenix had it for 2 months. Phoenix didn't have the oscilloscope set up on the right channels," he said. "And they weren't looking at the power supply circuit. Because they assumed it had been checked." "Because it had been checked," Lucas said. "The battery was fine. The alternator was fine. The main fuses were fine, so they moved on." He picked up the relay again, turned it over in his hand. Nobody pulled the relay and scoped the output. Patty was quiet for a moment. Then, "Order the replacement. I'll check if we have a compatible unit in stock, but for this car we probably want OEM or better." "Already looked it up," Lucas said. "Koenigsegg doesn't sell individual relays through standard channels. I'll have to source through a compatible spec. Same voltage rating, same current capacity, better contact material. I found one. Parts house in Atlanta, next day shipping. So we're 1 day out." "1 day," he said. "If the replacement fixes it completely." "Will it?" "Will." He set the relay down. "I'm 90% confident. The waveform signature was clean. The fault was at the relay output and nowhere upstream. The replacement should eliminate it." He paused. "But I'll run it for an hour after installation before I call it done." She nodded. She had learned over years not to push him past his honest confidence assessment. He didn't say 100% when he meant 90. That was one of the things that made him who he was. Marcus returned from the Subaru test drive, came in, looked at the Koenigsegg, looked at Lucas, looked at the relay sitting on the workbench. "That small thing?" he said. "That small thing," Lucas confirmed. Marcus picked it up, looked at it, set it back down. He was quiet for a moment in the way he got quiet when something was landing differently than he expected it to. "You know what's weird?" he said. "Tell me." "Every time it turns out to be small. The McLaren, 1 pin. This, 1 relay. He looked at Lucas. But finding the small thing is the whole thing. Lucas looked at him. Sometimes Marcus said things that were exactly right in ways that surprised him. Yeah, Lucas said, that's exactly it. He called Robert Calloway at 3 o'clock. Calloway answered on the second ring, the same as last time. Bennett. Found it, Lucas said. A pause. Shorter than the pause Victoria had given him, but carrying similar weight. Already? Power supply relay to the ECU. Progressive contact degradation. Intermittent resistance under heat and vibration. Classic pattern, but easy to overlook because the supply circuit upstream tested fine. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Lucas had the sense of a man running through the implications. The Phoenix facility, checked the battery, the alternator, the main fuses, all fine. Nobody pulled the relay and scoped the output circuit. Because they assumed the supply was clean. Right. Another pause, then carefully. You're certain? I'm certain of the fault. I caught it on the oscilloscope. Voltage dropout at the relay output. Nothing upstream. I'm replacing the relay with a higher spec unit, running it for an hour after installation. I'll call you when it's verified. When is the replacement arriving? Tomorrow morning. I'll have a result by early afternoon. Calloway was quiet in the way of someone making a calculation. Mr. Bennett, he said, I'd like to ask you a question, and I'd like you to answer it honestly. I'll do my best, Lucas said. Why did you find this and the Phoenix facility didn't? Give me a real answer, not a diplomatic one. Lucas thought about it. He thought about how to say something that was true without being unkind to people he'd never met. They approached it the way you approach an expensive, sophisticated problem, he said. They looked at the sophisticated systems, the engine management logic, the fuel delivery architecture, the electronic controls. Those are the systems that belong on a car like this. A relay and a supply circuit is something you'd find on any car. A 12-year-old pickup truck has the same kind of relay. So nobody looked there, because nothing about that car makes you think of a 12-year-old pickup truck. And you did. I looked at what the fault was doing rather than where it was expected to be, Lucas said. The fault was intermittent and fast. Too fast for standard logging. That told me it was either a signal layer issue or a supply issue. The signal layers checked out, so I looked at supply. Process of elimination. And the right equipment to see something that fast, he said. The oscilloscope made the difference. Without that, I'd have been guessing. Calloway considered this. The equipment wasn't specialized. No, it's available to anyone. The Phoenix facility probably had one. Then why? Because you have to know what channels to watch, Lucas said. And to know what channels to watch, you have to have a hypothesis about where the fault is. The hypothesis comes first. A long pause. All right, Calloway said. Call me tomorrow when it's verified. I will, Lucas said. And Bennett, Calloway stopped. Started again. I'm going to be direct with you. There are 3 other people in my circle with problem cars. Cars that various facilities have been unable to resolve. I've been waiting to see what you did with the Jesco before I said anything. Lucas said nothing. If the relay fix holds, Calloway continued, I'd like to talk about a more formal arrangement, not just referrals, something more structured. He paused. I'll explain what I mean after you call me tomorrow. I don't want to get ahead of the verification. That's sensible, Lucas said. Is that a yes to the conversation? It's a yes to the call tomorrow, Lucas said. The conversation follows from there. He could hear in the silence that followed something that might have been a smile. Fair enough, Calloway said. Tomorrow. He didn't tell Patty or Marcus about the second part of Calloway's call. Not yet. He'd learned, from years of the particular discipline that single parenthood teaches, the discipline of not building structures on uncertain ground, to wait for things to be real before he treated them as real. The relay replacement arrived at 9:15 the next morning via overnight delivery, well packaged, exactly what he'd ordered. He installed it in 40 minutes. The access was awkward but manageable now that he'd already navigated the brace removal, torqued everything correctly, reconnected the supply circuit, and reconnected the oscilloscope to the same 4 channels as the previous day. He started the car. It ran. He watched the oscilloscope. The power supply channel showed a flat, clean line, so no variation, no dropout, nothing but steady voltage exactly where it needed to be. He let it idle for 10 minutes. The waveform didn't change. He ran it through RPM increases in neutral. Clean. He let it drop back to idle and left it running. 20 minutes, 30, 45. At the 50-minute mark, Marcus came and stood in the bay doorway. "Anything?" he said. "Nothing," Lucas said, which is the right answer. Marcus watched the oscilloscope screen. The flat line of the power supply channel sat there, unwavering, across the whole span of the capture. "That's a really beautiful flat line," he said. "It is," Lucas agreed. At 60 minutes, he shut the engine off. He looked at the full oscilloscope record, 1 hour of data, 4 channels, 0 anomalies. He called Callaway. "It's done," he said. 1 hour clean, 0 dropouts. The fault is resolved. He heard Callaway exhale. A controlled sound, but the control wasn't quite complete. "You're certain?" "I'm certain," Lucas said. No qualifier this time. The data was clean and he'd earned the certainty. "All right," Callaway said. "Now we can talk." The conversation with Callaway lasted 40 minutes, and Lucas took notes on a legal pad because he didn't trust himself to hold all of it in his head while simultaneously processing it emotionally, which was the only honest way to describe what the conversation required. Robert Callaway was, it emerged, not merely a wealthy car collector. He was the founder of a private investment group that managed assets for approximately 30 clients, all of them in the upper tier of the regional wealth distribution, several of them with national profiles. The cars were a personal passion shared by a significant subset of those clients, and the problem of maintaining extraordinary vehicles in a region with no truly extraordinary maintenance facility had been, for years, a persistent frustration. "We've been sending cars to facilities in California, in Florida, in Germany for significant work," Callaway explained. "The logistics are expensive, and the turnaround times are unreasonable. When Victoria called me Thursday night to tell me what you'd done with the McLaren, the first thing I thought was, we need this person accessible." "I'm in Delford," Lucas said. "You're in Delford now," Callaway said, and left that sitting there for a moment. "What are you proposing?" Lucas asked. What Callaway proposed was not a simple thing. He proposed, in the organized and precise manner of a man who structured complex arrangements for a living, a joint investment in a significantly upgraded facility. Not a takeover, Callaway was explicit about this, returning to it twice as if he'd anticipated the concern. Lucas would retain full ownership and operational control of Bennett Auto Repair. What Callaway's group would provide was capital, enough to lease a proper facility with 4 or 6 bays, proper equipment, a clean room for sensitive electrical work, the diagnostic tools that currently required either manufacturer access or expensive workarounds. In return, Callaway's clients would direct their maintenance and repair work to Bennett Auto Repair on a priority basis. No exclusivity requirement. Lucas could take any client he chose, but the guaranteed volume of high-end work would provide the revenue base that the upgraded facility required. "You're not buying the shop," Lucas said, making sure he understood. "No, the shop is yours. It stays yours. You're investing in the infrastructure. In exchange for preferred client access," Callaway said, "which you'd be getting anyway through referrals. I'm just formalizing it in a way that makes the investment rational." Lucas sat with this for a moment. He was aware of the legal pad in front of him with his notes on it, the numbers Callaway had mentioned, the terms he'd outlined. He was aware that this was the kind of conversation that changed things, not incrementally, but categorically. He was also aware that he didn't fully trust things that changed categorically, because they sometimes changed back. "I'd need to look at the specific terms in writing," he said. "Of course. And I'd want an attorney to review them." "That's sensible. I'd be concerned if you didn't. And I'm not making any decision today." "I'm not asking for one today," Callaway said. "I'm asking you to take the proposal seriously and respond within a reasonable time frame." "What's reasonable to you?" 2 weeks, Callaway said. Lucas said he'd think about it. Callaway said that was all he asked. They ended the call. He sat at his desk in the shop's small office, a room barely large enough for the desk and a filing cabinet that needed new drawer runners, and looked at the legal pad. He looked at the numbers. He looked at the words operational control that he'd underlined. Then he looked through the office window into the main bay, where Patty was doing something methodical at the workbench and Marcus was on the phone. his personal phone, so not work, probably his sister again. And the 2 bays of the shop were exactly what they'd been for 8 years. Exactly what he'd built on the resources he'd had, which had never been enough, and which he'd made work anyway. He sat there for a while. He wasn't going to call anyone today. Not Derek, not Victoria. He wasn't going to say yes or no, or maybe or anything. He was going to let it sit for exactly as long as it needed to sit. But in the back of his mind, quiet and unhurried, something that had been tense for years was beginning, very slowly, to release. Tim, the journalist called that afternoon. Her name was Sandra Keene, and she wrote for a national automotive publication with the kind of reputation that, when Lucas looked it up quickly before calling back, turned out to be more significant than Derek had made it sound. She was professional and direct, asked smart questions, and did not try to make the story something it wasn't. "I want to understand the diagnostic method," she said, "not just the result, the process." He talked for 20 minutes about the McLaren, about the timestamps on the error codes, about what they revealed, about the search for the single fault in a car that appeared to have 47 faults. He kept the technical detail at a level that was accurate without being inaccessible. "Can I ask about your background?" she said. "Formal training, credentials?" "Community college automotive program," he said. 20 months, then 8 years of running this shop." A brief pause. "No manufacturer certifications? No dealership apprenticeship?" "No." "The facilities that looked at the McLaren before you, at least 2 of them had factory-trained technicians with manufacturer diagnostic access." "I know." "And you found the fault without any of that." "I found the fault by reading what the diagnostic output was telling me rather than taking it at face value," he said. "The tools matter less than what you do with the information they give you." She was quiet for a moment, writing something. "Mr. Bennett, people in the automotive world are going to want to characterize this story a certain way, as a David and Goliath thing. The small shop versus the big specialists. Is that how you see it?" He thought about that honestly. "No," he said. "The specialists weren't wrong to try. They were working from reasonable assumptions that happened to be wrong for this specific car. The difference wasn't resources or credentials. It was being willing to question the assumption when the data didn't add up." "The timestamp thing." "The timestamp thing," he confirmed. "That's what you noticed that nobody else noticed. I noticed it because I was looking at the data fresh. I didn't have previous attempts telling me where to look. That's not a skill. That's a position." She paused again. "You're making this harder to write as a hero story." "Write it as an accurate story," he said. "Those are more interesting anyway." She laughed. He found he liked her. The article, she told him, would run in the next issue, which was 3 weeks out. She might want to come to the shop, photograph the facility, get a quote from Derek and Victoria if they were willing. He said she was welcome to come to the shop. He said Derek and Victoria could speak for themselves. "One more question," she said, "and you can tell me it's none of my business." "Okay, you're a single dad. You've been running a small shop on tight margins for years. This week, the McLaren, the Koenigsegg, the attention, this changes things for you, practically and financially. How does that feel?" He was quiet for a moment. How did it feel? He thought about the water heater making sounds since March. He thought about Ava's soccer cleats she'd stopped asking for. He thought about Diane Chen sending food home with his daughter because she knew Lucas forgot to eat when he was working. He thought about the plywood sign with the faded letters and the one fluorescent that refused to come on. He thought about Claire saying staying in Delford. Is that a plan or an avoidance of having a plan? And about the answer he'd been arriving at, slowly, over years. It was a plan. Just one that took longer to reveal itself than either of them had expected. "It feels like it's about time," he said. Sandra Keene laughed again, softer this time. "That's the last line of the article," she said. He picked Ava up from school at 3:40. She got in, looked at his face, looked at his hands. The grease was less today, the work had been cleaner, and said nothing for the first block. Then, "You found the problem with the new car." "Yeah." "What was it?" "A relay." "What's a relay?" "An electrical switch, basically a tiny component that opens and closes a circuit. This one was failing intermittently." She thought about this. "How small?" He held up his thumb and forefinger about an inch and a half apart. She looked at the gap between his fingers. That's why it was at the other place for 2 months? The other place didn't look in the right spot. But you did. I looked in a different spot, he said. Whether it was the right one, I didn't know until I looked. She was quiet for a moment, watching the street. Then, Dad, someone called Mom's sister. He glanced at her. What? Aunt Rachel. She called last night. Someone told her about the McLaren thing, and she wanted to know if it was true. Ava was looking at her hands in her lap, not at him. She said she thought Claire would have been proud. The truck moved through traffic. A light turned yellow and he slowed for it, slower than he needed to, maybe. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just drove. She's right, he said finally. She would have been. Ava nodded. She still wasn't looking at him. I told Aunt Rachel you'd probably say something boring and practical like it was just a job. That's not boring, he said. That's true. That's why it's boring, she said, but without any heat in it. She looked out her window. I think it's more than just a job. He thought about the 47 error codes and the 1 pin, the relay and the oscilloscope and the flat line that meant something was finally working. He thought about Calloway's proposal and the legal pad with the underlined words. He thought about Sandra Keene saying it feels like it's about time and laughing like she meant it. He thought about Claire's canvas in the closet of the spare bedroom. He'd been meaning to figure out what to do with it for 3 years. Maybe it was time to take it out and put it somewhere she could have been seen. You might be right, he said. Ava looked at him. Really looked, the full attention she brought to things she cared about. I'm right, she said. He smiled. The private kind. The one he usually kept to himself. This time he let her see it. She turned back to her window, satisfied, and they drove the rest of the way home through the ordinary city that, if you paid attention to it at the right moment and in the right light, was quietly becoming the setting of something neither of them had quite had the nerve to fully expect. The 2 weeks Calloway had given him passed. The way significant time tends to pass. It's like, not slowly, not quickly, but with a particular texture that made each day feel slightly more weighted than the one before it. Lucas did not call Calloway at the end of the first week. He did not call Derek for his opinion, though Derek would have given it freely and probably at length. He did not talk about it with Patty beyond a single conversation on Monday morning of the second week, which he initiated and which lasted approximately 8 minutes, and ended with Patty saying what she thought with the directness she always used for things she thought mattered. You already know what you're going to do, she said. I'm still thinking about it. You've been thinking about it for 6 days. That's not how you think. You think fast, and then you second-guess yourself for the remaining time. She looked at him with the steadiness of someone who had watched a person work for 4 years and paid attention to what they saw. What is the second-guessing actually about? He considered the honest answer. He gave it. I built this place myself, out of nothing, on bad margins and long hours and a lot of months where I wasn't sure it was going to survive. Taking someone else's money to expand it feels like... He stopped. Like admitting it wasn't enough, Patty said. He didn't answer that directly, but he didn't deny it either. Lucas, she said, what you built here is the reason Calloway is calling, not despite what it is, because of what it is. She went back to the work she'd been doing. That's not nothing. That's the whole point. He turned that over for the rest of the week. On Friday of the second week, 13 days after Calloway's call, 1 day before the deadline, he called his attorney. Her name was Frances Delgado. She'd handled his shop's incorporation 8 years ago and 2 lease agreements since. And she was the kind of attorney who asked the questions you should have asked yourself and then waited while you caught up to them. He described the proposal. She listened. She asked 4 questions, all of them the right ones. She said she wanted to see the term sheet before she said anything definitive, but that the structure as described was not inherently unfavorable, that retained operational control was the critical provision and worth protecting explicitly, and that she'd review it within 48 hours of receiving it. He called Calloway. I'd like to see the term sheet, Lucas said. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. I'll have it to you by end of day. My attorney will review it. As she should, Calloway said. And then in a tone that was not quite personal, but not quite professional either. Bennett, I want to say something that's outside the transaction. Okay? I've dealt with a lot of people who were good at what they did. In business, in various fields. The ones who last, the ones who build something real, they're almost never the ones who had the most resources at the start. They're the ones who figured out how to see things correctly. You see things correctly. He paused. That's not something money produces. It's already there, or it isn't. Lucas sat with that for a moment. Thank you, he said, not deflecting it, not diminishing it, just taking it at face value. The term sheet will be in your inbox within 2 hours, Calloway said. It arrived in 90 minutes. Lucas printed it, read it 3 times, made notes in the margins, and drove to Francis Delgado's office the following Monday. She'd reviewed it over the weekend. He hadn't asked her to, but he recognized the woman's handwriting on the copy she handed him, annotated in red pen with comments that were pointed and precise. 3 provisions need language strengthened, she said. The operational control clause should have a carve-out list that's explicit rather than implied. The preferred client arrangement needs a defined cap on priority booking so it doesn't functionally become exclusivity through the back door. And the exit clause needs a longer notification period. She tapped her pen on the table. Everything else is reasonable. Is the deal structure sound? For someone in your position, yes. You're getting infrastructure without giving up the thing that makes you valuable. She looked at him over her glasses. Which is you, not the facility. Can you draft the revisions? Already started them, she said. The revised term sheet went back to Calloway on Wednesday. His response came Thursday morning. 2 of the 3 revisions accepted without discussion. The third, the exit clause notification period, met with a counterproposal that Francis reviewed and approved with a minor modification. By Friday afternoon of the 3rd week since Calloway's first call, Lucas Bennett signed the agreement at Francis Delgado's conference table with a pen that had her firm's name on it and a hand that was steadier than he expected. Francis witnessed it. She shook his hand afterward with the brisk warmth of someone who has just helped a person do something that mattered. Congratulations, she said. Now go find a facility that doesn't have a fluorescent light that doesn't work. 1 of 3, he said. I know, she said. I've been to your shop. Cool. He told Patty first. He called her before he'd even left the parking garage below Francis's building, sitting in the truck with the signed agreement on the passenger seat. Done? She said. Done, he said. She was quiet for a moment, then, good. And then as if remembering something. I found a building. On Clemmer Road off the Interstate Service Road. 6 bays, climate-controlled, a clean room already built out from the previous tenant, some kind of specialty fabrication company. It's been vacant 8 months. Landlord is motivated. He stared at the windshield. You found a building. 2 weeks ago, she said. I was waiting. Patty, you were going to say yes. I told you. She didn't sound smug about it, just accurate. I'll send you the listing. He looked at his phone. The listing was already in his messages, sent 2 weeks ago at 9:47 p.m. with no accompanying message, just the link. He sat in the parking garage for a moment, looking at the listing photograph on his phone. A clean, wide building on a road with actual traffic visibility. 6 bays. Room to grow into rather than out of. He thought about the plywood sign above the garage door of the shop on the service road behind the strip mall. The one he'd painted himself 8 years ago when he had nothing but the tools he'd bought secondhand and the lease he'd barely been able to sign and the belief, maybe slightly irrational but persistent, that he could make it work. He'd made it work. By the measure that mattered, he'd kept the doors open, kept the lights on, built a reputation through the quality of the work rather than the quality of the marketing. He'd made it work. The building was not the shop. The shop was the thing he and Patty and Marcus had built inside it. That thing was coming with them. I'll look at the building this week, he said. I'll set up the walkthrough, she said. Tuesday works. Patty, he paused. I'm going to need to talk to you about your role in the new arrangement. It's going to be different. I know. I mean, your compensation, your Lucas. Her voice was measured and calm. We can talk about all of that. But right now you just signed something significant, and I think you should probably go home and tell your daughter. He looked at the passenger seat. The agreement, 6 pages, his signature at the bottom of the last one. Yeah, he said. That's probably right. He picked Ava up from school 20 minutes early, which he almost never did. She came out of the building with the particular expression of someone who has been called out of class unexpectedly and is calculating possible reasons. the ratio of good reasons to concerning ones and where the probability mass lay. She saw him standing at the truck rather than sitting in it, and the calculation in her face shifted. "What happened?" she said. "Good thing," he said. "Get in." She got in. He got in. He didn't start the truck immediately. "I signed an agreement today," he said, "to expand the shop. New building, more bays, better equipment, a business arrangement with a group of investors who are going to help finance the upgrade." She was looking at him with the full attention expression, the one she gave things she cared about. "We're keeping the shop," he said. "It stays ours. I stay in charge of it, but it's going to be bigger, and that means more work, more clients, better equipment, and probably, financially." He stopped. Tried again. "Things are going to be more stable." She was quiet for a moment. He watched her face, trying to read it. "The water heater," she said. He blinked. "What?" "You can fix the water heater," she said. "It's been making that noise since March." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has been tracking a list of unresolved practical matters and has just been given reason to believe the list might finally start getting shorter. "Yeah," he said. "I can fix the water heater." She nodded, then after a moment, "And my cleats." "And your cleats," he said. She turned and looked out the windshield at the school entrance where kids were still filtering out, backpacks and noise and the normal chaos of afternoon dismissal. She was quiet long enough that he wondered what she was actually thinking, because with Ava, the surface of a thing was never the whole thing. "Mom would have said something smart about this," she said. He looked at the steering wheel. "Yeah, she would have. Like, she would have already seen it coming somehow, before it happened." "She was good at that," he said. "Were you scared to sign it?" "Some," he said honestly. "Because of losing control of the shop?" "That was part of it." "What was the other part?" He thought about how to say something that was real without being heavier than the moment warranted. "When things have been hard for a long time," he said, "sometimes good things feel fragile, like they might not hold." She absorbed this. She had the particular stillness of someone processing something that they recognized, not intellectually, but from experience. 11 years old, and she recognized that feeling. He wasn't sure whether that made him proud of her or sorry for the years that had taught her to recognize it. Maybe both. Probably both. "Does it feel fragile now?" she asked. He considered the question. He thought about the signed agreement on the passenger seat and Francis Delgado's handshake and Patty's listing sitting in his messages for 2 weeks. He thought about the oscilloscope waveform, that flat, clean line, 1 hour of data, 0 anomalies, and about section L7 and a relay in a Koenigsegg, and about everything that the past 3 weeks had confirmed. "Less than I expected," he said. She nodded once. The case appeared to be settled in her mind. "Okay," she said. "Can we get food? I'm starving." He started the truck. "What do you want?" "Tacos?" "There's food at home." "There's ingredients at home," she said. "That's different." He pulled out of the school lot. "Fine. Tacos." She settled into her seat with the satisfaction of someone who has navigated a significant emotional conversation and arrived at an acceptable conclusion. Outside the windows, Delford passed in its ordinary way. The gas stations and intersections and strip malls and apartment buildings. The city as it had always been, as it would probably remain, with or without the specific events of the past 3 weeks. But Lucas drove through it differently now. Not faster, not with more certainty about every turn. Just with slightly less of the weight that had been riding in the cab with him for years. The weight that had no specific name and never left completely, but which had shifted like something set down from one shoulder to both. He didn't remark on this. He just drove. The article ran 4 weeks later. Sandra Keene had come to the shop the previous Tuesday. She'd brought a photographer, which Lucas hadn't anticipated, and which Marcus had reacted to with an enthusiasm that Patty found somewhat undignified, and Lucas found mildly entertaining. She'd spent 3 hours there, watched Lucas work on a Porsche that had come in with an exhaust valvetrain issue, asked smart follow-up questions about the McLaren repair, photographed the shop in its actual working state, not cleaned or staged, just the 2 bays and the benches and the equipment, and the 3 of them doing what they did. She'd photographed the plywood sign. Lucas had almost asked her not to. Then he decided the sign had earned its photograph and said nothing. The article ran in the print edition and online simultaneously, and the online version was what spread, shared first in automotive circles, then picked up by a larger technology and business publication that ran a shorter version focused on the Callaway investment angle, then fragmented into the various digital spaces where these things traveled. Lucas knew about it because his phone started ringing at 7 in the morning the day it ran and didn't meaningfully stop for 3 days. He did not read the article for the first 2 days. He knew this was slightly irrational. He read it on the third day, sitting in the parking lot of Ava's school after drop-off on his phone, the truck running. Sandra Keene had written it the way she'd promised. Accurate, not inflated, the technical details correct, the human details present without being sentimental. She'd quoted Derek and Victoria. She'd quoted Francis Delgado, which he hadn't expected. She'd quoted Marcus, which produced a line about believing in the shop the whole time that was somewhat self-aggrandizing but not inaccurate. She'd quoted Patty a single time, in a line that was so precisely Patty that Lucas read it twice. He looks at things until he understands them. Most people stop looking before that. She had not, as far as he could tell, made him into something he wasn't. She hadn't called him a genius or a savior or used any of the language that would have required him to spend energy being uncomfortable about inaccuracy. She'd written about a mechanic who looked at a diagnostic readout and noticed something that others had missed, and what happened after that. The last line of the article was his own words. It feels like it's about time. He sat in the parking lot and looked at his phone for a moment after he finished reading. Then he called Sandra Keene. She answered on the third ring. "Bennett, you read it." "I read it," he said. "It's good." "It's accurate," she said. "Which is what you asked for." "Same thing, in this case." A pause. He could hear something in the background, keyboards, voices, the sound of a working newsroom. "How's the response?" she asked. "Phone calls," he said. "A lot of them." "Are any of them from places you want to work with?" He thought about the calls he'd taken and the ones Patty had filtered on his behalf. 3 collectors with vehicles that needed attention. 2 journalists who'd seen the article and wanted to do their own versions, which he'd declined politely. 1 automotive engineering professor from a university 2 states over who'd called to say the timestamp observation was, in his words, the kind of diagnostic reasoning we try to teach students and rarely see in practice, which Lucas had received with the particular awkwardness of a person who doesn't know what to do with academic validation. And 1 call from a manufacturer, not McLaren, not Koenigsegg. A different manufacturer, one whose vehicles appeared occasionally in the hands of collectors and whose technical challenges were, reportedly, not always resolved by their own service network. The call had been exploratory, careful, the kind of call that meant nothing concrete yet but suggested a direction. Some of them, he told Sandra. "The manufacturer call," she said. He was slightly surprised. "How do you—" "I have sources," she said mildly. "Are you going to pursue it?" "I'm going to find out what they're actually asking before I decide anything." "Smart," she said. "Bennett, one more thing. I wanted to tell you before you heard it elsewhere. The article's been picked up by 3 international outlets. Automotive press, mostly. 1 in the UK, 1 in Germany, 1 in Japan." He looked at the parking lot. A minivan was pulling in, a woman getting out, 2 kids tumbling after her in the way of children who have been released from a contained space. He thought about something Ava had said that first night, the night he'd called her from the shop after finding the pin, while she was eating dinner at the Chen's and waiting for him to pick her up. She'd been matter-of-fact about it, the way she was matter-of-fact about most things she believed in. Nothing is impossible once someone decides to start. He'd said that to her. She'd said it back to him at the exact right moment, and now apparently it had traveled, the story of it had traveled, to places neither of them had ever been, across an ocean, into languages neither of them spoke. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He wasn't sure anyone had a protocol for that particular feeling. "Okay," he said. "That's all you've got?" Sandra said, with the tone of someone who had expected more and found the absence of it interesting. "It's a lot to hold at once," he said honestly. "Yeah," she said, and her voice had something genuine in it now. "It is. You're handling it well for what it's worth." "I don't know if I'm handling it," he said. "I think I'm just not stopping work." "That might be the same thing," she said. Good luck, Lucas. Call me if anything else happens. If it's interesting enough, he said. She laughed and hung up. Mom. The walkthrough of the Clemmer Road building happened on a Tuesday afternoon when the light was good and the air had the first real warmth of late spring in it. Lucas and Patty walked through it with the landlord, a practical man named Garrett, who had owned the property for 11 years and was straightforwardly ready to make a deal. Marcus had asked to come, and Lucas had told him to hold down the shop, and Marcus had accepted this with the diplomatic grace of someone who understood the hierarchy while resenting the specific application of it. The building was larger in person than the listing photograph suggested. 6 bays, as described, with ceiling height that accommodated lifts Lucas currently didn't own, but could. The clean room was real, a sealed, filtered space that the previous tenant had built for precision work, and which was, for Lucas's purposes, almost exactly what he'd have designed himself. Climate-controlled throughout, loading dock access, actual parking. He walked through it slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, saying almost nothing. Patty walked separately, taking her own measure of the space, occasionally making a note on her phone. Garrett walked alongside Lucas with the patience of a landlord who understood that the people who took time to think were the ones who signed and stayed. He pointed out the electrical upgrades the previous tenant had done, the compressed air lines already roughed in, the HVAC system that was 2 years old. Lucas stopped in the center of the main bay area. 6 bays around him, the afternoon light coming through skylights that were clean and well-maintained. The floor was epoxy-coated, scuffed in places from the previous work but fundamentally sound. He thought about the service road behind the strip mall, the pigeon that investigated the dumpster each morning, the Vietnamese place that opened at 11, the one fluorescent that refused to come on. He thought about pulling up to that building 8 years ago with a truck full of second-hand tools, an assigned lease, and nothing else, and what it had felt like to unlock that door for the first time. That feeling of, this is mine, and I don't know if I can do this, and I'm going to do it anyway. He wanted to carry that feeling here. Not the uncertainty, but the intention underneath it. The part that said, I built something once out of not enough, and I'll build something better now that I have more. We'll take it, he said. Garrett nodded, unsurprised. Patty looked over from across the space, caught Lucas's eye, and gave a single nod of confirmation. The lease signed 3 days later. The move took 2 weekends, organized with the methodical efficiency that Patty brought to all logistical challenges and the cheerful chaos that Marcus contributed to physical labor. They didn't hire movers. They moved what they could themselves, with help from Derek Fuentes, who showed up the first Saturday in clothes that were slightly too nice for the work and threw himself into it anyway with a willingness that Lucas found genuinely touching. Victoria Hayes sent 3 people from her office to help on the second weekend, which nobody had asked for or expected, and which resulted in 4 hours of efficient box moving alongside a certain amount of awkward professional conversation between her staff and Lucas's, the two worlds momentarily occupying the same rented moving truck. Marcus predictably made friends with all 3 of Victoria's people immediately. The plywood sign did not come with them. Lucas took it down himself on the last afternoon at the old building, carried it inside, and leaned it against the wall of the now empty main bay. He stood and looked at it for a moment. The faded letters, the weathered wood, the work of a younger version of himself who had been operating on stubbornness and very little else. He didn't throw it away. He put it in his truck. It was in the garage at his house now, leaning against the back wall. He wasn't sure yet what to do with it, but getting rid of it felt wrong, the same way getting rid of Claire's canvas still felt wrong, and he'd learned not to force those decisions before he was ready for them. The new sign above the Clemmer Road building was simple, professionally made this time, clean lettering on a dark background. Bennett Auto Repair. The same name, just legible from the road. 6 weeks after the move on a Thursday that was otherwise unremarkable, Lucas received a call from the manufacturer. The exploratory conversation had become a more specific one, and the specific one had led to a proposal. A consulting arrangement, informal and non-exclusive, under which Lucas would be available to their technical support team for complex diagnostic cases that their own network couldn't resolve. Not a full-time role. Not a relocation. Just a phone call sometimes, when they had a car and a problem and nobody with an answer. He said yes, with a condition. Any cases he took on, he'd document his process fully. Not for them to own, for the industry, for the automotive forums and the independent mechanics and the small shops with 2 bays and a plywood sign that the collectors and the manufacturers and the big facilities tended not to see. The manufacturer said yes. He did not think of this as a victory. He thought of it the way he thought of the oscilloscope Patty had ordered, as a tool, a way of doing more of the thing he already did, in more places, with more reach. The work was still the work. That was the part that never changed. 3 months after the Clemmer Road move, Lucas was in the new clean room working on electrical diagnostic challenge, a Pagani, of all things, belonging to a client Callaway had referred, with a specific issue in the torque vectoring control system, when his phone buzzed with a text from Ava. Soccer tryouts tomorrow. Coach said I have a real shot at varsity. He looked at the message. He was in the middle of something delicate, both hands occupied, but he read it twice before setting the phone back down. He thought about Ava at 11. The soccer hoodie, the pasta sauce on her chin, the poster board about coral reefs finished after he'd fallen asleep on the couch. She was 12 now, and something had shifted in the past months. Not her personality, which was fundamentally unchanged, but her sense of herself within it. A solidity that hadn't been quite there before. He'd noticed it without knowing exactly when it had arrived. He'd asked her about it once, indirectly, on a drive home from a Saturday game. "You seem different lately," he'd said. "Different how?" "Steadier." She'd thought about it. "I think it's because things are steadier," she'd said. "Like, at home. It makes it easier to be steady other places." He'd had no response to that. It was too accurate and too simple, and it had done the thing that certain true things did. Sat in his chest and stayed there. He finished the diagnostic task, cleaned his hands, stepped out of the clean room into the main bay where Marcus was doing a service on a Bentley Continental that had come in that morning, and where Patty was on the phone with a parts supplier being, from the sound of it, extremely precise about her requirements. He looked at the bays. 6 of them. 4 currently occupied. The Pagani, the Bentley, a Range Rover with an air suspension issue, and a Honda Accord that belonged to a woman named Teresa who'd been bringing her cars to Bennett Auto Repair since the 2nd year of the old location, and who Lucas would no more turn away for a Koenigsegg than he'd have turned away the Koenigsegg for her. The Honda Accord was in Bay 4. The Pagani was in the clean room. This felt exactly right to him, and he wasn't sure he could have explained why to someone who didn't already understand it. He texted Ava back. "That's your mom's competitiveness. Good. Show them." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "That's kind of embarrassing to say." "It's accurate. Still embarrassing." "Text me after tryouts tomorrow." "I will. Don't stay at the shop all night." He smiled at the phone, then put it in his pocket and went back to work. Later that evening, after Ava was home and fed and doing homework at the kitchen table, with the focused energy of someone who had, at some point in the past months, stopped leaving things to the last possible minute, not always, not perfectly, but meaningfully more often than before, Lucas went into the spare bedroom. Claire's canvas was still in the closet. He'd been meaning to take it out for 3 years, and he'd said so to himself again the night he'd signed the Callaway agreement, and then again the day they'd moved into the Clemmer Road building. He opened the closet. The canvas was there, wrapped in a sheet the way he'd wrapped it when he first put it there, careful with it even then. He took it out, set it on the floor, and unwrapped it. She'd never finished it. It was a landscape, something imagined rather than observed, the way she painted, all color and suggestion. A field, maybe, or the edge of one. A sky in the specific shade of blue that happened for about 20 minutes in late afternoon before the light changed and you couldn't catch it anymore. She'd been working on it the last autumn she was well, when she could still sit at the easel for an hour at a time before she needed to rest. He sat on the floor of the spare bedroom and looked at the unfinished painting. He thought about all the things he'd been meaning to do and hadn't. All the things that had waited because the waiting was easier than the arriving. The water heater, fixed now. Ava's cleats, replaced. She'd picked them out herself in a sporting goods store on a Saturday in April, tried on 4 pairs with great seriousness, and chosen the ones that were not the most expensive because she'd said these ones actually fit right with the pragmatic certainty of her father, and Lucas had stood in the aisle and felt something complicated and good. The canvas. He'd been avoiding the canvas the way you avoided certain rooms in a house after something happened in them. Not because the room was bad, but because you hadn't figured out how to be in it yet. He looked at the half-finished field, the specific blue of the impossible late afternoon sky. She would have been proud. Aunt Rachel had said it, and it was true, and he'd known it was true the whole time, carried it the whole time. It just lived in a part of him that didn't have easy access to the surface. He thought about what he'd said to Ava on the drive home from tryouts the night of the McLaren. We kept doing the work. That's it. That's the whole thing. Claire had kept doing the work too. On the canvas, on him, on their daughter, on the life they'd been building right up until she couldn't anymore. The painting was unfinished because she'd run out of time, not because she'd stopped. He'd been running out the clock on taking it out of the closet. He was done with that. He carried the canvas down the hall. He hung it in the living room, on the wall above the couch, where the light was good in the afternoon. He stepped back and looked at it. It was unfinished. It would stay unfinished. That was part of what it was. But it was out. It was where it could be seen. Ava came out of the kitchen, drawn by the sound of him moving around. She stopped in the hallway, saw what was on the wall, and went still. "Is that Mom's?" she said. She said it quietly, not quite whispering. "Yeah." She walked over and stood beside him, looking at it. He put his arm around her shoulders, the way he had when she was smaller, and the way she still let him sometimes, when the moment was the right kind. "I didn't know she was this good," Ava said. "She was better than she thought," he said. Ava leaned against him slightly. They stood there in the living room, looking at the unfinished painting, the field that might be a field, the sky in its impossible blue, the particular beauty of something that would never be completed and was exactly what it was supposed to be. The water heater was fixed. The rent was paid, and had been paid without the monthly arithmetic of catastrophe for 8 weeks now. The shop on Clemmer Road had 6 bays and a sign you could read from the road. Somewhere in the city, the McLaren was in its garage, operational and beautiful. The Koenigsegg was back with its owner in Phoenix, running clean. The article had traveled to the UK, Germany, Japan, places Lucas had never been, carrying a story about a pin and a relay and a man who looked at things until he understood them. And here, in a house on a cul-de-sac on the eastern edge of Delford, a man and his daughter stood in the living room looking at an unfinished painting on a wall where it should have been years ago, in the ordinary light of an ordinary evening. There was no music, no dramatic punctuation, just the refrigerator hum and the baseboard heater and the distant sound of the neighbor's dog, and the particular silence of 2 people who had gotten through something hard together and were standing on the other side of it, still standing. "It's good up there," Ava said. "Yeah," Lucas said. "It is." She pulled away after a moment, the way she did. She had the right amount of sentiment and not a drop more, same as her father. "I'm finishing my homework," she said. "I know," he said. "Don't stay up too late." "I won't." She went back to the kitchen. He heard the chair, the sound of her pencil, the small sounds of a person working on something that needed finishing. He stood alone for another minute with the painting. He thought about what he'd said to Ava on the drive home that first night, when the engine had roared to life and the flat line on the oscilloscope had held for 60 minutes, and something that everyone said was impossible had turned out, simply, to be difficult. He'd said, "We kept doing the work." That's it. It wasn't a philosophy. It wasn't wisdom he'd arrived at through study or inspiration. It was just the thing that was true, distilled from years of early alarms and bad margins and long hours and grief carried quietly, and a daughter who deserved better than whatever was left over. You showed up. You looked until you understood. You didn't stop before you found the thing. And sometimes, not always, not with any guarantee, but sometimes, the thing was there. He turned off the living room light, went to the kitchen table and sat across from Ava while she finished her homework, the way he'd sat across from her at 10,000 tables over 11 years. Just there, present, doing nothing dramatic, being the person who was still in the room when she looked up. She looked up once, around 9, when she was nearly done. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah. I'm glad we kept going," she said, like it was a conclusion she'd reached just now, like she'd been adding things up in her own quiet way all evening, and this was the total. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table, The slightly chaotic ponytail, the mother's eyes, the particular expression of someone who had figured out something real and wasn't making more of it than it was. "Me too, Bug," he said. She went back to her work. He stayed at the table. Outside, Delford went about its evening. The lights in windows, the traffic thinning on Route 9, the ordinary world in its ordinary motion, indifferent and complete. The city that was too big to call a town and too small to call impressive, where a man and his daughter had gotten up each morning and done the next thing and then the next thing for years, until the next thing turned out to be something worth telling. The alarm would go off at 5:14 tomorrow. Lucas Bennett would get up. He would make coffee. He would make toast. He would write a note and tuck it under the sandwich bag and zip the lunchbox closed. He would drop his daughter at school and drive 11 minutes to the shop on Clemmer Road and unlock the door and flip the fluorescents on. All of them, they all worked now, and stand in the familiar smell of the place, which was oil and metal and rubber, and the honest residue of work that mattered. And he would do what he had always done. He would look at the thing in front of him until he understood it. That was enough. That had always been enough. It just took a little while to see it clearly.